We should be live.
Hopefully.
Welcome, one and all, to the pre-show of the Tech Poutine.
Always the pre-show.
Yeah. Let's get this thing on the road. It's been a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Mostly my fault. Mostly my fault.
Yeah.
For those of you who were keeping track, we were meant to do one at AMD's event a couple of weeks ago, and they had two very different tracks for who was doing what. The analysts were kept busy from dawn till dusk with Q&A and stuff.
Whereas press had a bit of time.
Yeah.
So
you had some time to do some videos. I wandered into Jeff's live stream.
Yeah, it was Jeff Jordan and I on his live stream that day. And then
so it's Craft Computing, Jordan from Storage Review at the time.
At the time. Now at WD. So
yeah, one of our peers has a job in the industry. It's the rare thing.
Yeah, rare, quote unquote.
Rare. It's it's you see it sometimes, right? People, journalists and stuff. They go to Apple. They go to I know people who've gone Samsung to Razer, to Asus.
I don't remember who exactly, but one of the WCCF guys went to AMD.
Did he?
Yeah.
Are you not speaking about Keith?
No.
Oh, Usman left. I thought he was at the AMD's event under WCCF's banner.
No, he was there as an AMD employee.
Huh. Interesting. Very interesting. And then so we've got some stuff to talk about that. I think George is just opening up his beef jerky.
Yes, I am. This is for when I start getting a bit peckish. Yeah.
We then had some AMD Financials. We had an Arrow Lake launch. Then we had some
AMD Financials, then Intel Financials. And we were supposed to have one. Yes. And we were supposed to have one Friday. And then
I ended up being waylaid and then over the weekend as well. So we're here now on Guy Fawkes Night, November 5th. Which is where we burn effigies, we burn puppets of a supposed ringleader of a plot to blow up the Houses of Parliament. So just as we're celebrating our government not being overthrown, the US is I've jokingly put into the title that this is the US election special. Now, there's two ways to take that. There is we're going to complain about the parties and everything they're in, or we can talk about the tech implications, depending on who gets in, or I can just wear my MAGA hat and we'll be done with it. By which I mean make AMD great again.
I'm pretty sure Lisa Sue's already trying that and succeeded for the most part.
And just in case people accuse me of being a shill, I have an Intel hat as well. This is Habana.
And where's the independent hat?
And this is the Jill Stein hat. Just in case people didn't know where my allegiances lie. But seriously, go out and vote. If you're American, go and vote. It's the best thing you can do for your civic duty, and it gives you a voice.
Agreed.
Even if you think your vote doesn't matter. In the UK, actually, every vote does matter, because every party that gets a vote and gets more than a certain number, I think it's like 500,000, you get what's called short money, which is money given to the political party for the process of actually being in the election. And last election, I think it worked out to about £1.60 per vote. So a party like Reform with 11 million votes got almost £20 million worth. So yeah, it's at least in my country, voting counts. In Australia, if you don't vote, then you get fined $20 because voting is mandatory.
Yeah,
I actually saw a reel or a short today that said if you make the vote universally financially, as in you're required to vote and the penalty is financial, that causes people to vote in general more towards rebalancing of wealth. If you make it dependent on, say, how much you earn, so for example, I think, is it in Argentina, your paycheck can literally be withheld, then it actually disproportionately affects the rich people, or something like that. But yeah, definitely go vote if you can, if you're allowed. It's I think one of the things we should talk about, I guess, is something that has been in the news. It's not on the docket, George, but we should still talk about it.
So in terms of voting, I already mailed my vote in. So yeah,
it's okay. We've got lots of stuff to talk about. And yes, sorry, my quality is potato. So one of my tabs seems to be uploading to, eating my bandwidth, and I don't know why, and I can't find out which one. So I'm going to be slowly trying to adjust my potato-ness as we go forward. Hopefully our audio is fine now, because I bought George a microphone.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, if you didn't catch in the last episode where we were actually in person, we used a Shure MV7 Plus, of which we both each have our own now. So at least when we do them remote, we should sound a lot better, AC or fan or otherwise. I've been using it now for the last few videos and it seems fine. Just trying to adjust a small audio delay for some reason. For some reason, my machine is never perfect, but we'll give it a good go. Yeah, and I guess before we start, George, what are you eating?
Well, I'm having some coffee and some Jack Link's beef tender bites, teriyaki flavor. And
I will be drinking. It won't autofocus because I've got it in fixed focus. Some Vault City Winter Berry Crumble, 6%, a modern sour beer. Because it is the season. We now have
so
plenty of Christmas stuff.
After this, I will very definitely be having some alcoholic beverages, either to celebrate or to drown my sorrows in.
So normally, in the UK election, I stay up as the results come in, because the way our results come in the UK is we have 650 different constituencies, each with around anywhere from 70 to 100,000 voters. And then over the night, those come in. Whereas you guys, you just have 50 declarations. And you can narrow it down state by state. But the thing is, when your polls finish is middle of the night for us. So it pays more sense for me to just
fall asleep and then wake up in the morning and see the aftermath.
Yeah. Well, or because we'll still be seeing some votes coming in, and I actually just had a call with John from LTT, who lives in North Carolina, so swing state territory.
Yeah. What's funny
he
is
told me he'd already voted. So good.
California is not a swing state, but my House of Representatives member is a swing state. is a swing county. So or whatever they were district. So yeah, that it's also important not just to vote in the federal, but down below.
Yeah, down ticket.
Yeah. So to answer your question, Patrick, these are what was formerly Mr. Speakers, but is now Dan Clark Audio Aeons. These are fairly old at this point. These are not the 2 or the new ones. But yeah.
Well, whereas mine were 20 quid from Amazon, and they're falling apart right now.
Oh, these are this ear pad is falling off. I have to re-glue it.
Fun. So it's actually Claudia asks, since you have an ARM t-shirt, any idea or reason why they have commercials on podcasts? Who is the audience for it? Are you asking whether we have commercials on podcasts, or in general podcasts have commercials, or ARM podcasts have commercials?
I think they're asking why ARM podcasts have commercials.
ARM have a podcast? I'm actually meeting them next week.
Are you?
So yeah, that should be fun. I'm gonna meet up with Gavin as well.
Oh, how's Gavin? I know he's been writing for the Register, and I noticed that on your AMD Financials, another name cropped up, formerly of Brian Smith.
Right. Okay. So
yeah,
lots of things going on there. Again, this is still pre-show. So
yeah.
Gavin now writes for the Register, and he's very happy. I had a chat with him last week before. He's settling down very well. He said one of the big differences is that he's one of a team, right? Of what, a dozen or so writers that they have over the Register. After I left Anantech, when it was just him and Ryan, it got a bit lonely. And small team doing small team things. I mean, Chips and Cheese has the Discord, so that's fairly vibrant and active. Me, I'm just a loner, so I'm happy to be by myself. So yeah, he's landed and he's doing well, and he's going to be doing some reviews for them, I think, as well. And hopefully we get to see him at events, and also get to see him next week. Ryan is still going through a period of R&R, but I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" He said, "Not much." I said, "Do you want to flex the old brain noodle?" And I asked him if he could help write up AMD's financials last week. So while I was listening into the analyst Q&A, the call, the Wall Street call, and doing a live transcription of what they were saying, he was going through the financials and essentially, did a good part of the first part of that article, talking about the numbers, the headline numbers, and what was going on with all the different business units. And then I went over and added all the stuff that came out of the analyst Q&A, because that often adds color to what each business unit is doing. Things like, Embedded may be down in the first quarter due to something or other, or what gaming is doing, or for example, we're getting to it, but the $5 billion number on AI. So yeah, he's he's still still stepped back, and but yeah, no, it's I also asked him to do the Intel one on Halloween, but he had nieces and nephews to deal with, so he unfortunately wasn't able to help there. Technically, today is Global Foundries, and I screwed up because Global Foundries are odd in the fact that they do the financials before Wall Street.
They do before market close.
No, they do before market open.
Oh, they do before market. I thought they did it at market open.
Oh yeah, at market open. Yeah.
Everybody else's does at market close or after market close.
Yeah. So I need to go back through that. Also, yesterday Lattice had theirs as well, and I've got some graphs historical data for Lattice. So if I get time, I'll go through that. But yeah, I think Ryan is slowly and casually, still looking at what he's going to do post Nantech, probably in the new year. And just to point out earlier, Lele says Arma publicizing themselves in ad spots on podcasts. Hey, if they want to do promotion, perhaps I need to speak to them about it next week, and we should get some sponsors.
I mean, in theory, you should be sponsored by everybody. Therefore, you're biased towards nobody, or you're sponsored by nobody and biased towards nobody, right?
Well, I mean, is this where I put in the ad? The ad spot. I have to load it up. And let's.
This content, there are multiple ways to support the channel. You can like and subscribe this video, and many thanks for doing so. There's also Patreon, which gives you access to our Discord. There's a merchandise store and a newsletter, links in the description. For all of you who do contribute, thank you. You are keeping me well fed.
Ian shilling himself.
Yes. So if you would like some TechTechPotato merch, like this mug with a Cerebrus wafer on it, there should be links in the description or whatever. You know, the usual stuff.
You still need to fix the CNC link, because for whatever reason it doesn't like the HTTP and not HTTPS.
Oh, yeah, okay, I'll get on that.
Cloudflare being weird. Name something new.
I'll get on that. But no, it's, I mean, this stuff has got to be self-sustainable, and things like microphones and beer perhaps should, perhaps we'll get a sponsor, and then we'll also get George fed as well. That's always a goal. Yeah, and not just in jerky bites. Okay, so let's go into the main show then, I guess. I've got a banner for this. The Tech Poutine. So welcome everyone to the newest episode of the Tech Poutine number 10, your one-stop shop for general banter about the tech news industry. On today, the US election special. Not really. We're not really going to speak too much about the election. You should have joined us for the pre-show for that. As always, I'm your host, Potato.
And I'm Cheese.
And if we had a guest, there'd be gravy. But no guests today. We're actually going to be in Atlanta in a couple of weeks.
Maybe we'll have some gravy there.
And maybe we will have some gravy there. I at least know several Canadians that will be there as well. Yes. Neither of us are Canadian.
No.
So on today's docket are a number of topics, and we've both kind of seen them in advance. But the first one I want to bring up, because it is an election special, and because I'll make this joke now that more people are here, I will wear my MAGA hat. Make AMD great again. Just in, yeah. And I also have Intel.
Make Nevada great again.
Third party. My dual side cap for Qualcomm. It's all good fun. However, the one thing that is relevant to us about the US election today, and if you haven't voted yet, please do go vote. It's your civic duty. I'm not telling you who to vote for, but you should vote. And make sure it's a good one. The one thing that does affect us in the tech industry is the CHIPS Act. This big bucket of money that the government has promised to the tech industry for a variety of things, but basically bringing manufacturing back in again. And we all thought this was kind of a done and dusted deal. And it had been going along, and some awards have been made. Nothing's been dispersed yet, I think, because the initial awards were based on basically initial proposals. After the initial proposal and the award, you then have to give out a full proposal. Then it gets allocated. And companies like Intel are almost fighting with the government about what stipulations have to be in place about who is where their money has to be spent and on what. and Intel's arguing that they've been following these rules for years. They should be expedited for some of that money. So that's all going on. The one thing that has hit my newsfeed this week is that if the Republican Party win today or tomorrow or whenever the final counts are voted, there have been statements to the effect that they will cancel the CHIPS Act.
Yeah, so those statements came from Speaker of the House. I can't remember his name.
I was going to say Ryan Gosling there, but it's definitely
no. Mike Johnson.
Milk Toast.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the whole point of the CHIPS Act, and I've got a feeling that it was a both parties agreed to it initially. It was a bipartisan, essentially reinvigoration of the semiconductor manufacturing in the USA, and whether it goes to Intel or for Samsung to build on US soil, or for TSMC to build in US soil, or Global Foundries expansion, or all the tool makers and all the supply chain that deals with that. Okay, yes, it's a government handout, but it pales in comparison to what the Taiwanese government have given TSMC.
Yeah. Or military-industrial complex. What the U.S. spends on its military, right? So,
the U.S. spends what, $800 billion on the military a year, 600 to 800.
Mind you, that's the discretionary fund. That's not the mandatory funds. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're gonna give $50 billion over what, 5 to 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Then it's Intel's argument is that it's not enough, and it sounds like that Mike Johnson's argument is that it's too much, like 50 billion too much. So this came very last minute in the campaigning, and I have it in the back of my head that somewhere Trump was asked about this and he agreed with it, or at least essentially we've got to cut spending. I don't actually think Mike Johnson actually knew what he was talking about when he was just basically, this is money that some people think is frivolous. What do you think? Yes, we should get rid of frivolous spending.
I don't know. I will admit I'm afraid of speaking more and sort of getting too much into politics. But I do think that the CHIP Act is, for the most part, good funding. There is extra fluff, which there always is. But in general, I think in general it's aimed at the right places. And what isn't talked about is the funding for additional STEM programs at universities here in the US. That isn't talked about very much, but is very important to that act and what that act is trying to achieve.
I think the IBM Albany site just got awarded some of that STEM research money to go expand the site up there. I want to say
for SUNY Albany, the nano engineering program. Oh, neat.
Yeah. That came through. I actually did a video on that when they were in the process of doing the application. I don't think they've been given the full amount what they awarded, but at least part of it, and these things are going disbursements. And yes, okay, it's government money. I think the main criticism is that they don't want it essentially being funneled into share buybacks.
Yes, and I would agree with that. I think funneling money into share buybacks is bad. So
Intel has said it's not doing any share buybacks starting from next quarter. They announced that in Q2. We've just had Q3, so they already had Q3 share buybacks in place. Much to the market's chagrin, but there won't be any in Q4. but yeah, if some money goes to Infineon or Applied or
has Texas Instruments been given any?
I don't know. I've not been keeping up to date with all the pennies.
Okay,
they're going where?
Because TI is actually a big manufacturer of military silicon.
Yeah.
Because a lot of military equipment doesn't need bleeding edge. I think the most bleeding edge of equipment in militaries is FPGAs.
Even then, they do run some hardened silicon. So
yeah,
it's yeah. To answer the Zemadeus' question, Intel has literally 50 billion of debt. Why were they thinking of buybacks in the first place? Every company does essentially buybacks every quarter. The whole point is Intel was moving theirs from 2 billion a quarter down to $500 million a quarter, and now they've gone to zero.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's they list it under giving back to the shareholders, because without the shareholders, the company's not worth anything. But also it reduces the share pool, a small amount every time. And for a company that's their market cap is now 100 billion. So yeah, it's the whole point of the CHIPS Act will go to multiple places. And I mentioned Applied. I mentioned potentially Lam Research. Oh, and our good friends who used to be at Intel, who you met once upon a time.
Mm-hmm.
One of them has gone to work for Lam.
Oh,
so we may be getting a better media-facing.
That would be Lam. I will say Lam is interesting, but they aren't often talked about because they don't really have much of a PR department.
I think over the years I've had they've invited me to two press briefings.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say one of them was maybe early 21. And the thing is, if you're doing content either written on an Antec at the time or in video about a new company, you have to spend the time introducing who the company is, right? You can't just go full in whack. Oh, Lam Research today is announcing a new this, that, or the other. You have to explain who the company is. And
yes.
That just requires a little bit more effort than just AMD does this today or ARM does this today. So yeah, that was the main barrier. It's one of the things I tell my startup clients. You have to keep engaging with the press, because if you only engage with them once every 6 months, you have to keep reteaching them about yourself.
Yes.
And that takes up half the time. So even if you don't have anything to say, just reach out and say, hey, just to let you know, we're still here. If you've got any stories that you want, you maybe want a quote for, or you've got questions about, or you think we may be interested, let us know. And that's really the bare minimum that a PR person has to do.
Also, I was talking with Risk5 International about this. If you're like Risk5, yes. If you want to get the press interested, now this is certain sections of the press, send them hardware. Send them hardware to play with and talk about, because it gets names out there. Are you going to pull out TensorTorrent?
No.
Okay.
That's up here.
Because I know you have one of those cards. I know someone who just got a wormhole.
Excuse me. No, I haven't yet.
Okay. No, I know someone who got a wormhole 300.
You mean they actually purchased one?
No. They got sent one.
I think I know who sent it and why.
Yes. It's exactly the two people you're thinking of. Yes.
No. I'm just pulling out my latest two purchases.
Are those Knights Mill?
One is
7295.
What's the other one? These are the two highest SKUs of Intel Xeon Phi ever.
Okay.
So I've got the 7290 and the 7295.
Okay.
This cost me £60. This cost me $300.
Yeah, sounds about right. That extra
because,
5, it multiplies the price by 5.
No, I've been after one for what, 8 years?
Yes, I know.
Jesus,
You've told
damn.
me. You've told me.
Yeah. So yeah, and just randomly collecting random silicon. We've gone a bit off track.
Actually,
yes.
So behind the camera, I have if you guys know, then you know, I have a Xiaoxin KX7000 system, which if you don't know, Xiaoxin is the Chinese x86 vendor, not Hygon, which was a joint venture with AMD. Xiaoxin is a joint venture between VIA and the Shanghai municipal government. But now that VIA gave up Centaur to Intel with an acquihire about 3 years ago.
No. So technically, VIA had 2 x86 licenses.
Yeah, they still have the x86 license. So
from Cyrix.
They actually never gave up the Centaur / WinChip license. I don't think. I think it was just a pure acquihire. Centaur.
We won't find out that story until we actually get details from a Centaur employee.
No. VIA publicly said that they did not surrender the x86 license.
No, because they already had one. Why? It wouldn't matter if you had 2. Anyway, we are getting way off topic about the random silicon we've bought this
Yes.
So CHIPS Act, I hope it continues. Realistically, we need to see some of that money being dispersed properly. And as George said, it has to also be there for STEM. I don't know about you, but the number of job openings recently for chip designers and silicon verification engineers is through the roof.
Yes. And I think so I said that AI in chip design was not going to kill jobs. It was just going to reassociate jobs. It was essentially just going to move jobs around. And I think we're sort of seeing that move because
it's reduced the cost of those tools.
Yes, to the point where smaller companies can do some level of chip design.
But it also means that even if you have the same team, if the cost is lower, you can do a lot more.
Exactly.
So getting an extra 5% on your frequency or your power or your wire delay is now a lot easier. So the funny thing is, Lele Socho, who asks, when are you going to get a Knight's Landing with the Omnipath fabric?
He already has one.
So here's Itanium.
He has so much. By the way, for you guys, that room is tiny.
Xeon Phi Knight's Landing 7210F. The funny thing is,
he has so much in that room. It's amazing.
The funny thing is, the Omnipath IP is currently sitting with a company called Cornelis Networks. Cornelis Networks has a new CEO called Lisa Spellman, who used to be the head of the Xeon and Memory Group, XMG, inside Intel. I have a meeting with her in a couple of weeks.
I actually want to meet with her and potentially do, because I met with the president of Cornelis.
Yeah.
But
it's so I
would almost like a video interview with them. So
my chat with Lisa is not going to be recorded. It's just we haven't seen each other in a year, and you're now in a new job. Let's have a chat.
How's it all going?
Maybe there's scope for us to work together in some fashion. I don't know. It's their marketing team is also somebody who I'm very, very familiar with, who is also marketing for another client of mine. It's this industry is always who you know and who moves where, and I'm not saying it's incestuous, but a lot goes around. For example, I used to think Sci5 didn't like me because of the video I posted last year. I had a meeting last week before, with their new VP of marketing, who is an ex-contact from somewhere else. And so because he's there now and he knows I'm good for communicating, we've reinvigorated it. And to the question asked, which titanium is this? This is titanium 2. That is literally all it says.
Oh, that looks like Merced.
So it's a card here. So it's got this fin here, but it also has pins on top here. I believe this is like another 30-40 pound purchase from eBay.
Titanium servers are still kind of expensive.
Yeah. And then we have Zen 4 delated as well. I keep all my exotic stuff that's just CPUs there. My exotic system stuff is over there. But there's lots to go around. Ooh. Yeah. Okay. So that's CHIPS Act. That was the one I didn't prep George on that we were going to speak about.
I suspected that was going to come up.
Yeah. It's so let's. We're not going to go through this necessarily in chronological order, just because we want to talk about stuff. Let me see if I can bring up a screen here.
But the first topic is, speaking of Intel and CHIPS Acts, Intel's financials, since we didn't get to cover that.
Yeah. So let me see if I can zoom in. Now, the thing is, because it's Halloween, Intel opens itself up to a number of headings.
Tons.
And given that they announced, restructuring of 18-point-something billion dollars, which is a negative on the balance sheet, they could just, Intel's Halloween horror, Intel, whatever, multitude. I don't know who picked Halloween. It's stupid. But yeah, it's the headline number is, for the people who don't regularly follow financials, usually you compare year on year. So you compare this quarter this year versus the same quarter last year, because in general, there's a lot of things that are cyclical. Certain things happen in Q1 every year, like Chinese New Year, or Q4 every year, like Christmas, or back to school.
That's Q2, Q3.
It happens in the consumer space, it happens in the enterprise space. So they do this year on year. And so revenue is down year on year, but it's actually above the guidance. At Wall Street, the investors, they, the company puts out a guide of what revenue expects next quarter, but also the street predicts what it's going to be the next quarter, and it was above guidance. And usually that means stock price goes up. Usually. Not all. Gross margin, so this is a margin of profitability. That this should actually say non-GAAP, typo error. That's down to 15%, and it should be about 42, and we'll get into why. Net income, a loss of $16.6 billion, which sounds like a lot. However, not much of this is cash, which again goes into financial reporting, because the assets of a company have value, and you have to report that value as part of the company. So if you amortize your assets, if you get rid of your assets, and in this case, a lot of it was, say, the Intel 7 fab tools. If you essentially say, well, the value of these is now 0, that's a loss on your balance sheet. So it's not cash, but it means that things like gross margin stuff look down. And earnings per share is negative $4. Perhaps I'm not enough of a financial dude. Does that mean that everybody with a share has to pay $4? Or does that mean
have no
nobody
idea.
Gets anything? The thing is, even with these numbers, because the revenue is good, and the margin without this big net income loss is actually 41%, which is above expected. Market was 15% up. And yet the reason why this is down is $2.8 billion in restructuring charges in Q3, relating to a cost reduction plan. Intel's going through cost reductions.
That's the layoffs, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, and we're getting into it. Only 1,200 of the layoffs were done in Q3. So not the full 15,000. So this may be money they're putting aside for layoffs. So we should point that out. 3.1 billion charges recognized in cost of sales and depreciation of assets related to Intel 7. So again, this is where they overspent on tools, but also their expected sales volume is lower. So that's recognized in cost of sales. 2.9 billion in impairment of goodwill, such as Mobileye. And I actually learned more about goodwill. So when you acquire a company, you essentially acquire two things: tangible assets and intangible assets. So tangible assets are things like the buildings and the equipment. And
IP is intangible, isn't it?
Intangible things are things like the brand or the messaging, and I guess into maybe the people as well. And the thing is, even though you've acquired the company on the basis of the tangibles and intangibles, the value on your balance sheet is actually just really the tangibles. So over time, you have to monetize the intangibles off as goodwill. And so that ends up as a negative on the balance sheet. And they're still going through this with Mobileye. I think they're done with Altera. And I know AMD has about another 20 billion to go on Xilinx, for example.
Yeah.
And that's actually going to take another 10 years to fall off. So, and then $10 billion or 9.9 of non-cash charges related to valuation allowance against US deferred tax assets. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what that means. I should have asked. I didn't get a call with Dave Zisner this time around, which is interesting. Dave Zisner is the CFO, and the last few quarters he's done a call with analysts. I actually like Dave, right? A lot of people find a lot of CFOs really tough to deal with. Dave is blunt and honest.
That's right. Good.
And he doesn't sugarcoat things, which from a PR perspective is bad, but from an analyst trying to get information is really good. And in his Q&A during this, he actually did really well. So yeah, that's 18.5 billion. And if you take that out of this net income at the top, you actually end up with margins around 41%, which is actually damn good for where Intel is right now.
Yeah.
And we'll get into the graph in a second. But the reason why it's 41% and not like 36% is because they had a seasonally good Q3. So they had a better sell-through with reserved inventory. That basically means customers had less of what they expected they needed and bought more to make up the shortfall, which is good. It means revenue. It's not a recurrent revenue. So
it's a one-time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this would be like Dell thinking, oh, we need 2 million processors this quarter. And actually, no, we need 2.5 because we don't have enough supply to last us if supply chain shenanigans like the pandemic happens. So this is what the graph looks like, and I hope it comes through okay on the stream. This is Intel's revenue, and this is the generally accepted accounting practices revenue and gross margins. As you can see, during the pandemic, it's like this blip up here where it peaks at $20 billion a quarter, and then has been down ever since. Q3, which is this last blue line, is this quarter, and that's why the margins are down at 15%. I have been asked to change this to non-GAAP to make it not look better, but just to be more readable. And then the guidance for next quarter is 13.8 billion. So for this year, for these 4 quarters, they're expecting revenue to rise every quarter seasonally. Thing is, it also happened last year. I'm not sure if you can see there. And that went from 11.7 to 15.4. Thing is, hopefully Q1 doesn't fall back.
Yeah.
Q1, just for those who know, is traditional seasonal low for consumer, because all the consumer sales happen in Q4, back to school. Q1, you have Chinese New Year, so it's a compounding effect weighted against Q1 and towards Q4. So there's that. Mr. Vipatis said, do dividends remain suspended? So Intel last quarter, and we said this in the pre-show a little bit, said that they were suspending dividends and share buybacks. They said that will start in Q4s.
I think dividends are different than stock buyback.
Well, I mean, you don't have a dividend if EPS is negative.
Yes, but dividend is different than dividend. I'm pretty
They're
sure
in the same line on the sheet.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that dividend is money that the company gives back to its shareholders. EPS is essentially the amount of money that a share made, and then stock buyback is the company buying stock off the market. These are three different things that interact but are different. I think, not a finance person, so.
When your school asks what sort of classes you want to do to prepare for the real world, a finance class would be great.
I actually did take a finance class, but it was more about like personal finance and figuring out what, like, not stocks to buy, but like what what's the word I'm looking for? Like bundles of stocks.
They see, I'm an idiot. When I got the choice to do economics at 17, I decided to do English literature instead, and then quit English lit after 6 weeks. I also did the silly thing of, when given the opportunity to do an electronics GCSE, I decided to stay in the cadets. So I was an Air Force cadet for 7 years. And because that was year 7, and I did a couple of good things. I got a gliding scholarship, and got silver wings. But yeah, the alternative was to spend those Thursday afternoons doing a electronics course instead, and I should have done that, and I should have done economics as well. But you know, I'm an idiot, so yeah. Outlook, 13.8 billion with a gross margin of non-GAAP of 36.5. They expect GAAP will still be lower than that, because they say there will still be some of these regressions, some of these restructuring charges. It won't be as bad next quarter, but the market kind of cancels that out anyway, because they realize that it's one-offs and most of it's non-cash. And to your point about employee numbers, this is where this graph comes in. Intel has said, and they've gone through most of the motions already, that they're going to reduce the headcount by 15,000. However, on the call, it was said 15%. They keep changing whether it's 15% or 15,000, which is really annoying. But in the last quarter, because Intel lists it as to the nearest 100, actually, that didn't go down 1,200. It only went down 900. Again, math. Or 800 even. The thing is, those who took voluntary redundancy, right, were decided end of August and finished on the 30th of September. These financials finished on the 28th.
So they did a bit of.
So it was only the voluntary redundancies that stopped immediately. Involuntary redundancies were being decided in the middle of October, and those people will leave either at the end of November or the end of year. And I actually know some of the voluntary ones that are leaving end of year as well. The only difference is that certain regions that Intel operates in, like Israel, have stricter requirements for layoffs. So if you lay off somebody in Israel, you essentially have to have a conference with them about the layoff. And this is a legal process they're required to go through. So it's going to take longer to lay people off in Israel. And we'll get into a story in a second about one of the divisions of Israel they're completely mothballing. As I said, overall, share price is up, or was up after hours. What's it at now? I think it was up today, wasn't it? It's now at $23, so it's
came down a bit from the after hours, but it's still higher than prior to the.
So it's there. It is what it is. We can quickly go through revenue per group. So this is again quarter, and at the bottom you've got CCG, DCAI. They're all roughly making the same amount of money every quarter this year. Remarkably consistent. Why is that? Yeah, exactly.
I honestly have no idea. But
nobody knows.
What is shocking to me is that as of this quarter, AMD's data center division has made more money, has more revenue than DCAI has. And I don't think that that's a sentence that anyone could have predicted being said.
This is the first time.
I believe it's the first time that that AMD data center has made more revenue.
We'll get into the AMD numbers in a bit.
Yeah.
And just to go quickly through, Foundry lost a lot of money, or the revenue is down year on year. The operating loss is partly due to restructuring. The 3.1 billion for the Intel 7, which we mentioned. They actually said that attributed to a margin loss of 71 points. So the margin for Foundry is still negative 63%. A lot of that is because of build out. Once Intel stops building out fabs, that will go up. Okay. Then they just have to keep the fabs full.
I will say that the revenue drop is not.
They haven't fully put on Foundry.
Yeah, but still, ideally, you would see the revenue go up, even if losses increase.
The thing is, also, they've said that Foundry has they've got $15 billion worth of deals on the books so far. That's lifetime deal value. That's just 3/4 of Foundry, and they're talking about that as the value between now and the end of the decade. It's not enough. But the highlight is that the advanced packaging side of the business, so EMIB and Foveros, because that's also being used externally by a few companies, made some money.
AWS, I think, is the biggest for Graviton 4.
There's a few that aren't public.
Of course, but the big one that is public is AWS in Graviton.
Is Graviton 4 advanced packaging? I thought it was standard packaging.
No, it's advanced packaging. They use EMIB. I think 3 and 4 both use EMIB.
Okay. I've seen an image of 3 and 4. Anyway, it made money. So advanced packaging, they've definitely got a route to revenue there long term. Also, isn't Lunar Lake being done?
Yes.
That's packaged by Intel.
Yes, but that's internal.
Yeah. I know it's Intel, but it counts towards the revenue in this case.
Yes.
And this is an image of when Fab 34, which is the fab that's doing Intel 4 and Intel 3 in Ireland, was opened last year. I was there. Actually, right by this sign, I think it's actually this security guard. He actually recognized me and wanted a selfie. It's a Polish guy, really nice. They still said that 18A is progressing well. Key milestones for leading 18A products on client, so Panther Lake and Clearwater Forest, are being met with ease. And the ramp is expected in the second half of 25 with revenue in 26. So we've still got 6 quarters to go before we start seeing 18A revenue.
Okay.
Which I think if they could accelerate it, they would. And then external design wins. Intel said that they're in the process of finalizing a deal with Amazon for an AI fabric chip, which is perhaps next generation Nitro.
Yeah,
AWS Nitro is
Nitro, or potentially an AWS equivalent to the NVSwitch chip that NVIDIA has.
Yeah,
something along those lines.
We'll see. The thing is, because it's a foundry product, Amazon's going to have to talk about it, not Intel.
Mm-hmm.
So, I do want to bring this in because this is I want to do this in an actual proper video, because I think in late August, early September, Pat Gelsinger stated that 18A had a defect density rate of below 0.4. Mm-hmm. So normally we consider that to be what's called the D0, which is a measure of physical defects per wafer per square centimeter. And through that, you can actually calculate physical yield. So physical yield is different to what we call parametric yield, which is what actually works at the end of the day. Parametric yield is still based on binning. But also some chips can absorb defects pretty easily, depending on where the defect is. And they build in redundancy for that. So D0 isn't your be-all and end-all defect rate, but it is a good proxy that the industry uses. And for example, the D0 of a mass-produced volume process node, like N7 or N5 at TSMC, is about 0.07. Mass.
I think TSMC N7 started at like 0.12, 0.1, and then has trickled down since.
Yeah, it's one of these things that improves over time. The question is, at what point does it become a process that produces chips for retail?
Yes.
And whether the company buying those chips can accept the defect rate. So if you're building an AI chip, maybe you can accept a high defect rate because you know that one of your chips is going to sell for a lot of money. Or if you're an Apple and you're building a smartphone chip, then out of a wafer, you're going to get at least 100 chips anyway. You just keep buying wafers and you can absorb the cost. But yeah, so over time that comes down. I have heard of D0 as high as 100.
Was that first generation 10 nanometer?
No. But I wanted to do here just to show you what D0 means in terms of yield, because the questions everybody asks is, well, what does that mean for yield? The answer is it depends on your SoC. It depends on the chip you're making. So here I've said a smartphone SoC, in your standard phone is about 100 square mil, if you don't include the modem, for example. Apple's new M4 is about 97 or something, or 104, in that ballpark. So it's roughly 10 mil by 10 mil, because these things tend to be square or slightly rectangular. So using the defect rate of 0.4 and traditional scribe lines and edge loss, which just means the distance between the chips and how much of the edge of the wafer you ignore because it's flexible, that translates to a yield of 67.9%. And there are calculators online to do this. Which doesn't sound like a bad yield for a chip that you're going to build 400 on a wafer, right? Maybe that's acceptable for you if you're in that. But if you're doing a large AI chip, a reticle-sized chip, about 800 square mil. So I've put 30 by 27, just to keep it whole numbers. That's 810. Using a defect rate of 0.4 with the same scribe lines and the same edge loss, that's a yield of 8.25%. So I think defects per wafer for 0.4 is about 300. So if you think that a large chip you only have like 35, 40 chips on it, but you're going to have 300 defects, chances of you getting a good chip are quite small. If you're going to use a small chip like an SoC, then yeah, you can use. Then perhaps this defect rate is quite fine.
What's interesting to me, right, is if you look at Clearwater Forest in the images that Intel has put out, like the artist rendition version of it, it's 12.
Patrick Kennedy has a photo, but yes.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can.
12, like almost. If I don't have a delidded one. Yeah, I don't have a delidded one here, but it's basically 12 little like almost Zen sized chiplets put onto a base tile, right? So that should in theory improve yield rates. And then for Panther Lake, it's going to look a lot more like Arrow Lake, which again, small compute die, so and then you can do skewing and whatnot to increase your parametric yield. So, 0.4 is not the bestest number, but for a
but we're a year away from volume.
It's a year away from being in products, and even when it's in products, a lot of those products aren't using reticle limit dies at the moment.
Yeah.
So.
But also Pat said that it's below 0.4, so it's better than this. This is worst case.
Yes.
I mean, again, parametric yield on top of that, binning and what have you. But yeah, I hear you say, aren't numbers fun? Because if you go tell the investors the yield's 68%, or if you go tell them it's 8%, this is why yield is a bad metric when talking about the quality of a process. It's the yield at a die size.
Yeah.
So, as I said, all being told, defect rate of sub 0.4 a year before high volume production feels like a good number.
Yeah.
And Pat also said there's a good line of sight to be proved that.
I think N7 was 0.3 or 0.35 a year before launch. So that puts 18A at roughly that level.
Yeah,
if my memory serves.
I think TSMC numbers are slightly higher for like N3, N2 than their N5, N7 because it's a more difficult process. There's more steps.
Yeah, but still, point is good number.
Good number. Also in this quarter for Foundry, it got a $3 billion win from the CHIPS Act Secure Enclave. So again, this is an allocation. They still have to go do the full proposal. But investors in the Q&A were more interested in exact customer wins, right? They want to actually see companies putting money down. You may remember a few quarters ago, they said we had $1 billion prepayment, and we're pretty sure that's from Amazon now. And then in terms of split, and this is actually a conversation I've already had today about Intel being spun off and parts of it. Pat looks like he wants to do with Foundry what he did with Mobileye and what he's doing with Altera. Essentially make it an independent business unit with its own CEO, its own board, its own advisors, its own fiduciary board, bring in external players to help advise it, and then do a partial IPO. As in, extract some of the value out of the Foundry, but still maintain ownership, which is what it's doing with Altera. It's what it's done with Mobileye. So he did say there's a push for it to be a subsidiary with its independent advisory and fiduciary board. The bit about it being a partial IPO is words that I'm adding here because that's the route that sounds. Thing is, you can, if you need money further down the line, you could do another 10% IPO, then another 10%, and it's rather than just mothballing something or killing it. So
basically, Intel could sell off all but 50 plus 1%, like 50% plus one share, and still have majority control. Yeah.
So, and then we move on to data center AI. Revenue up, but income down and margin down. We've seen, Xeon 6 is now part of that mix of revenue that's starting to come up. But the thing is, Intel is showcasing wins on 4th gen, 5th gen, and Xeon 6. I really wish they would retroactively just rebrand it to Xeon 4 and Xeon 5 like Wi-Fi did. That's what I've done. And Pat did say that Intel sits at the heart of more than 70% of all AI-focused GPU platforms. While that's true, I don't think that that's much in the way of revenue, or as much as they want it to be, because arguably you don't need the top chip, a 56 core or whatever, or a 60 core to be that SKU. And at some level, especially in high volume, they're giving them away for, what would normally be a 5-figure SKU tray price. It would be a 4-figure, low 4-figure actual sale price. So, oh, and here we have, Clearwater. Now, the one miss in DCAI I want to bring up is Gaudi. And again, this could be a larger video that I could do. But in terms of AI revenue this year, 2024, selling hardware, NVIDIA is going to make about $50 to $60 billion. We know this, right? AMD, as we'll get to in a bit, is saying that they're going to do $5 billion plus. Intel has announced that it will miss its $500 million target. So they're missing a 10% of AMD target, which is a 10% of NVIDIA target.
Yeah.
Pat also kind of fluffed the answer to the analyst Q&A about this. We can get into that in a second. But I mean, Gaudi 3 doesn't support one API. There haven't been many.
I've ranted that a few times.
They in the quarter they did announce a collaboration with IBM Cloud. So IBM Cloud is going to have Gaudi 3 in it. They didn't say how many. Could be 3. So it's
so and you brought up the question: should Intel abandon AI chips, essentially, big data center AI chips? So Gaudi, were you talking about Falcon Shores there or not?
Well, so the knock-on effect would be no Falcon Shores.
Yes.
So yeah, it's one of the calls I had today. We were actually trying to work out how much Intel has spent on data center AI to date. $2 billion for Habana, $400 million for Nirvana. Movidius is consumer, so let's ignore that. So okay, $2.4 billion, and let's say November 2019, because that's when, or December 2019, that's when they bought Habana. So that's best part of 5 years ago now. With a burn rate of what could be described as a startup, they've probably spent $5-7 billion on data center AI. This is also a chip that's being built at TSMC. They've got to buy the HBM. They've got to package it. And they're making less than what Cerebras made this year in revenue. And Cerebras is a startup.
Yeah.
Does it make sense for Intel to be in the position they're in and still have Gaudi 3 on the books? Still have an AI chip on the books? They made it was such a big thing that they missed mobile back in the day. In order to essentially compete in AI, they had to buy 3 different AI companies, mothball one goes to consumer, and the other one is kept not at an arm's distance. I mean, Habana's an Israeli-based acquisition. Already had 2 designs almost ready to fire, of which this is the second, Gaudi 3, all built on TSMC, not on Intel. And Intel just doesn't have the customers. It's not a self-sustaining business. Does that mean that Intel should leave the AI business and go build and go buy later somebody who's actually doing it well? Will there be anybody doing it well?
I was going to say
NVIDIA and AMD. Do they go buy TensorTorrent, for example?
The issue is, well, other than I don't think Jim would sell to Intel.
No.
Or really anyone. But that's
or Sam Manova. But then the question comes, what's the revenue of Sam Manova?
Well, not just that. What here's the thing that I'm gonna counter you, and I'm gonna say no. They shouldn't give up on big AI chips. At least not yet. Yeah, no. We need to see what Falcon Shores is like, because I think that will be.
So agreed. If I knew more about what Falcon Shores is going to be like, then I would have a lot more. Now, I do admit that saying that Intel perhaps shouldn't be in data center AI right now is a pretty bold take to have.
It's almost heretical.
Yeah, but I'm not entirely committed to it. If that makes sense, I'm just following a few breadcrumbs and trying to extrapolate a line, and then realizing, is this the right path, right? Especially given what Intel's going through. Yeah, it sucks if they completely miss data center, AI accelerators, ASICs. But another company who's not in AI in their biggest division. ARM doesn't have any AI IP for smartphone or data center. Okay, they have some stuff for embedded, right? And
no, I was going to laugh and say GraphCore. I was going to make that joke, but
again, that's come. If GraphCore becomes the AI division of ARM, that's come through an acquisition. They have some IP, and ARM has a solid base of customers, right? Is it a case of Intel as a company has a history of throwing good money after bad?
Yes.
Right. There was an argument made to me today that why didn't Intel just cut 10 nanometer off when it had major issues and go focus on an EUV process? And my answer was ego. Or people in the company couldn't, because there was so much pride in what they were doing.
I also think that there was a level of technology in 10 that needed to work to make 4 and 3 viable.
Well, I mean, well, the argument is Intel may put, Intel is on their first generation EUV. You could argue they're second because their first wasn't productized. Whereas TSMC is on its fourth. So, and as Josh said, it's Intel's history with integrating acquisitions has been hit and miss over the years. Mobileye kind of worked. Altera had issues, but now it's getting back to where it should be. We'll get into a company that didn't work as well.
I know someone in the fintech space, and they're like, basically it's the unsaid message is Xilinx has an effective monopoly here.
Right. So the counter to that is Xilinx is using a distributor that people hate.
Who, Arrow?
Yeah.
Oh.
So, Mr. Vipitis asks, is there any comment on Melville Sound? Intel cancelled that like a year ago.
So what Vipitis is talking about, I think, is Battle Mage. I think that's Battle Mage.
Well, yeah, it's the other thing is Intel's not going to give up on graphics because graphics is so embedded into their portfolio. It's
I've made this argument before. They can't cancel iGPUs, but in theory they could can the desktop DGPUs.
But they couldn't sell it, because if you have a Venn diagram of CPU and GPU, on the CPU side you've got Xeon. On the GPU side you've got Arc discrete, and in the middle you've got desktop and notebook. If you sell CPU or GPU, you have to take the whole circle, and that doesn't work. So anyway, we're going deeper into the weeds here. Client computing is down, even though it's the biggest revenue in the business. Part of this is because Lunar Lake's expensive to make. It's built on TSMC. It uses advanced packaging. It doesn't have the margins that normal historic Intel processors had, but also they've stated that they're tripling down on Lunar Lake supply. Lunar Lake is so good they're making 3 times as many chips as they expected.
Intel
has decided to triple the volume of Lunar Lake because it wants to ramp this product due to AI PC, which means that they get still at units. They're still making some money. It's just not at the same margins, the same percentage of profits that they used to be. The upside of that is when Panther Lake comes into play, end of next year, and starts replacing those those Lunar Lake sales, they get the double benefit of it being mostly on Intel silicon and on Intel packaging and all the benefits therein. So they say they know the margin is depressed because of this, but as they go forward, it's going to look a lot better. So, yeah, that's that. Between Pat Gelsinger and Dave Zisner on the call, that's what they went into. Yeah, and the depressed margins evaporate with Panther Lake in the second half of 25 and into 26. Pat said that Panther Lake will be using 18A for most of its silicon area. He stopped short of saying it's all going to be on Intel. What he has said in the past is that right now Intel has 30% of wafers at TSMC. By the end of the decade, he's going to reduce that down to 20%. So, yeah, let's briefly go through the rest because we've almost spent an hour on this topic. That and the election stuff. Networking and Edge. Edge is being moved out of networking and Edge and moving into CCG, consumer.
I fundamentally don't like that because it's like, then rename your group if you're doing that.
They will at the start of Q1, I think. So the point is, Edge mainly uses Xeon E.
Yeah.
And that sort of portfolio. And that is essentially rebranded consumer parts with RAS features. So that's why they're moving it under CCG, even though it sounds more like an enterprise product.
Edge was using Xeon D, which is like the low core count versions of Xeons.
Again, it's the overlap is broad. So Altera, so formerly PSG, is now on the books as its own business unit. Money's down because they're going through. You remember when the whole semi market crashed after the pandemic because there was too much stock everywhere. In this market, in Altera's market, that's only just happening.
Okay. So when is the expected recovery? So
Xilinx and I think Lattice essentially expected the recovery to be this quarter. Though Xilinx, it looks like it is this quarter. Lattice, it looks like it may be next quarter. Intel is saying perhaps Q2 next year. However, the company is in the process of launching Agilex 5 and Agilex 3. George and I have some inroads now into some of that. If we wanted to go down that route and show you some hardware, we need to go rattle a few cages. But we know it exists, and that's half the battle.
Yeah, and
right?
Yeah,
I do need to speak to Sandra and the team over at Altera at some point. Unfortunately, I missed their event mid-September because I was on vacation.
Yeah.
But Pat did say they started initial talks with investors during this fiscal quarter about the IPO, and they're expecting to finish in Q1 next year with a lead to that IPO. So basically, they're looking for a lead investor to the IPO. Or it may be a private IPO, who knows. Mobileye down 8% year on year. They didn't really speak about Mobileye at all, just that its exposure to China has been reduced. Mobileye's lead products were in the Geely.
Yeah, they were in Geely. So that would be Volvo, Polestar, Geely, and a couple other brands that I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, so they're saying exposure to China has been reduced. My final thoughts were essentially that even though the numbers look bad, if you factor in the fact that most of them weren't cash related, it doesn't really affect the cash bottom line. It's just essentially it's losses that they don't need to pay tax on almost. Intel has been criticized for hiding behind new debt issuance or relying on risk mitigation in the past. So this was essentially a quarter for them to cut most of it and essentially say, here's a big loss. What are you going to do? And the market went up.
Yeah.
It's in order for IDM 2.0 and Foundry to work, customers still need to come. This isn't Wayne's World. Just because you build it doesn't mean they'll come. You have to sell it.
Yeah.
And then I said that actually Xeon 6 is really good. And Turin is really good. It's one of the best times to be in the enterprise space right now. Because damn chips are good. Consumer, but enterprise is a good place to be. And then I go through, my thoughts on AI, which, it's up for interpretation. And then we have the analyst Q&A. One small thing I want to add to this.
While you announce that, I'll be back in a few minutes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So while you talk about Granulate, I'll
Granulate. Yeah. So this is sourced from Calculus Tech. I haven't been able to verify this, so take it as you will. But Intel acquired Granulate in 2022 for $650 million. Granulate is a software optimization company, and their whole thing, if I remember correctly, was that they were looking at ways to optimize the Linux kernel such that enterprise workloads and would essentially be faster with fewer bottlenecks due to the kernel, the Linux kernel, causing some bottlenecks, and they were acquired essentially to help go accelerate a portion of that business, the ISV optimization business. Turns out, rather than selling them, Intel's just mothballing the entire workforce. 100 employees. Not sure. Intel did attempt to sell, but failed to find a buyer. Interesting. This is the problem when you acquire startups. If you're the only one interested in the startup, A, you should get it for a rock bottom price. Depends if they actually want to sell. And B, if there's no value after that, you still have to bring it in. Difficult decision to discontinue the Intel type app level optimization product line. So their customers who were implementing it are no longer going to be able to use it. Startup raised $45 million and sold for $650. So what's that, a 15x multiple? Hopefully they got some good money. I actually met these guys because Intel had an Israel tech tour in 2022. And on the face of it, it sounded like software that was pretty good. For me, it sounded like, hasn't this been done in the past? But clearly it hadn't. And Intel just doesn't think it's worth the OpEx of having 100 people on the books in Israel, clearly, and they don't want to keep supporting the product line. And the whole point was they wanted to help Intel's software engineers internally. But this is part of the $10 billion cost-cutting plan. I have to assume that the goodwill from this acquisition had already been processed, but if not, they get to write it off fully now. They didn't even, spin it out and partial IPO or whatever. But it's along with this headline, Intel cuts free coffee. They've also stopped doing the Intel shuttle.
Oh. Ooh.
So Intel had shuttle flights between, Portland, Arizona, Portland, Santa Clara, and Santa Clara, Arizona. 3 routes, 3 times a day. I think there were like 40, 50-seat aircraft. So if you're an Intel employee, you just book a seat. And at the peak, you had to book a month in advance. Now, when the glut happened during the pandemic, and they did cost cutting, then they stopped the shuttle and said everybody has to go fly commercial. But obviously, if you fly commercial, there's a more overhead.
Yeah.
And the argument was, if you fly commercial, you have to get it approved by a manager, and the manager would have to, essentially put this in the expenses for the department. While that happened, it turned out they ended up spending more money on commercial. So they went back to the shuttle. Now they've gone back to going commercial. So it is what it is. Yeah. And then, Dom, if we can get a link for number 3 that I can show up, and number 4, let's talk about AMD's financials. And I know it's going to be financial heavy today.
Yep.
Apologies. It's that week. It's financials week, and we've got some stuff to speak about. So this is the article I did in partnership with Ryan Smith, formerly editor-in-chief of Anantech, almost said of Intel then. He's still enjoying some downtime, and I said, do you want to flex your brain muscle? And he agreed. So we co-wrote this. And I think the big headline for AMD is record quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's up.
Big quarter.
Their biggest revenue ever so far, because they're guiding that next quarter will be even bigger.
Yeah.
So
7.5, if I remember correctly, for next quarter.
We'll get to that. The other thing is AMD also crossed 50% data center and AI revenue. If you remember years and years ago, Intel said, we're going to be a data company, not a chip company. And to do that, we're going to have 50% DCAI. Right now, they're 20, 25%? And I think they may have gone over 50% once in one quarter. AMD has now done that, and by quite a way. The other headline was that in terms of AI chip sales, AMD at the beginning of the year said 2 billion in 24. Then they upped that to 4 billion, then 4.5 billion. That's now 5 billion plus.
Yeah.
So they're selling 2.5 times more chips than they expected at the beginning of the year. Part of that is because proof of concept deployments with clients are hitting all their goals earlier. So loads of money. So revenue 6.8, so not the 7.5, but still up 18% year on year. Gross margin 50%, which is in line with corporate average. And then outlook 7.5 billion. Sorry,
that was the 7.5 that I thought. Yeah.
Yeah. I think this should actually say Q4. Yeah. And the way it looks like is this graph, and this is a bit more dense. And I appreciate if you're not running 1080 or what my upload is doing might be a bit crap. But the end result is biggest quarter ever, start of Zen 5 revenue, but even bigger next quarter. Yeah, they were top line of their range of revenue. They did what they call a beat meet. I think they met. They beat revenue. They met gross margins. However, the financial market went.
Yeah.
And share price went down. And the reason why is it was what they call it was already priced in. As in, the markets expected this, so they bought to sell. Or whatever. Stock market is crazy. Down 7% after hours. Which is silly. It is what it is. and here we go through each business unit. So AMD has 4 business units compared to Intel. The biggest one now is data center, 3.5. Client is up, gaming is down, embedded is up. Now the data center is the biggest one, and we should go over this. The revenue is up 122% year on year. That's pretty good, with operating income of $1 billion and operating margin up to 30%. So this is the growth in this is both EPYC and MI300X. MI325 is not part of this revenue yet, because those only start shipping in Q4.
Yep. Well,
so,
I think they're shipping now, but now was Q4. So
yeah. So partners have been sampled for a while. But yeah, and Lisa pointed to increased engagement with all major providers in cloud, but also an uptick in enterprise. So that's traditionally a more delayed market. This is me at AMD's AI event, holding it up like a boombox. This is the smallest form factor dual socket with all the I/O breakout. I believe this was a Winstron board.
Yes.
And they also have a single socket version. It is 1 DPC, not 2 DPC. So
wait, scroll back up.
16.
Oh
no. This is 2 DPC, but the 8
channel. 2 DPC 8 channel. Yep.
Yeah. Because now chips can natively support fewer channels than they're actually built for, and work well. So, and they mentioned that in Q4 they're going to have M25X, with AMD touting significant orders from Microsoft and Meta. So Meta not only is buying NVIDIA, they're also buying AMD, but said that Meta has already deployed 1.5 million EPYC CPUs. So what's the ASP on an EPYC CPU?
But is that for the full? Is that for
that's lifetime.
7 years? Yeah.
We already know that Microsoft is more than 50% AMD internally, and uses AMD for ChatGPT 3.1 or 4.0 inference. Especially and Llama 301, 405 billion parameter models. They're all inferenced on AMD, on MI300. Yeah, so revenue is still MI300X focused. There's no MI300A revenue anymore. That's done. Yeah, sad. If anybody has one, I will happily, acquire it.
Send one to me.
Well, I have the 7295, so maybe I just have to wait 8 years to get one. So MI325X will increase through the first half as ramps up. MI350, which is the one after, is on track to launch in 25, and then MI400 in 26. So they're actually being more open with the roadmap from the Advancing AI event. In terms of Ryzen and Ryzen Mobile, obviously we just had the we had the Zen 5 launch a little while ago. X3D is here in a couple of days. We know that
X3D is, I believe they said when
review. Yeah, I think retail is 7th. Reviews is slightly different. But what has been is Ryzen AI 300, and this quarter was growth. It's actually been declining over recent. So the fact that there was growth, operating margin isn't that good, and that's because mobile chips aren't the high margin parts of the business. To be honest, even AMD said the MI300 is below average margin for the company. The way that gets gets higher than corporate average is just through volume and maturity. And because 325X uses the same platform, just different HBMs, they can take benefits of that, and the same thing will happen going forward. This is Lisa at the Advancing AI event. Yeah, and they also said they're ramping up laptop shipments. I asked about this, about whether this means, because there were reports that they weren't able to supply previous generation Ryzen mobile to demand, and they said, yeah, there should be no problems here. That being said, if they have a limitation on wafers, you know they're going to put them into MI300 regardless.
Yeah.
Consoles down, gaming down. Here's a very disappointing graph. So this is GPUs.
GPUs and semi-custom for the consoles.
Yeah, we're in year 5 of the cycle now. So we're massively down on that. But also, we haven't had a GPU launch in forever. But
I think we're due one in probably CES time period.
So they did say early next year, RDNA 4.
Okay, they did say that. Awesome.
Yeah. I saw it on PC World's title of their podcast, which is, I think, running at the same time as us. And I had to double check that was actually public. And I found it on their Twitter feed. So, yes.
Yeah.
It's there. And operating margin of 2%. Embedded, which is Xilinx and AMD Embedded, the classical, still dealing with post-pandemic recovery. AMD expected the bust in this market to break in Q1 this year, but it didn't pan out. Q2 was down, but Q3 is slightly back up. And they announced a couple of new Pensando products, which also falls into this business.
These actually, I'm kind of excited for. Something I wish. So 2 things on the Pensando front. I think AMD could improve. Get their SDK public, and 2, actually sell these properly at retail, because these things can actually do some pretty cool things, according to friend of ours, Wendell. So I would like to see more on the Pensando side.
Are you talking about the DPU or the Ethernet?
The DPU, but I think the Ethernet uses the same chip, so it can actually do a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah. And in the last quarter, AMD also announced EPYC Embedded 8004. That falls under this, and some new sort of mid-range UltraScale Plus chips. But the conclusion is this, right? Data center is over half, and in client, and you've got over 3/4. Gaming is tending towards 0. Sorry, gamers.
So, okay, for RDNA 4, I know the chip has already been made and taped out and all that. What they really need to focus on are stuff like the encoders and decoders, as well as they need to build bigger
chips.
It's. I know people say, "Oh, they won't make money on it." Great, but it's not about necessarily making money now. It's about
building an ecosystem. And at IFA, the head of the division, Jack Hune, was quoted as saying, "We want to focus on the mass market," which Tom's Hardware interpreted as they're not going to build high-end GPUs anymore. They actually asked them, "Does this mean you're not doing high-end GPUs anymore?" And he turned around and said, "We're focusing on the main market."
I love Jack, but the issue with that statement is that it implies that you can't do both, and we know that you can.
Also, as I understand it, that interview was very impromptu with Paul from Tom's, and apparently the interview was going okay. That question was asked when the PR person had to leave the room briefly. So she didn't know Jack had said it until it was posted. You know. So, yeah, fun times. The other big thing in the quarter was the announcement of the acquisition of ZT Systems, which has now passed all the regulatory hurdles. So this is AMD, what, $5 billion?
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah, acquired a company that is well versed in building AI infrastructure configurations and systems for clients. Their whole business is company X needs a new AI facility. They subcontract it out to ZT Systems to go build and spec and what have you. So it's not. AMD said they're not going to be building their own DGX type systems. I think Georgia's frozen.
Yes, my camera.
Yeah,
decided to.
But the thing is, I know the analysts. We want them to build a DGX system.
I think if they don't, it would be a massive missed opportunity. I know that they're afraid of pissing off their customers, but I think building a DGX like box would be a good move.
I mean, they already do like a reference design. It's called the Radeon Instinct platform, if I remember correctly, or just the Instinct platform. But they don't.
So that's just the baseboard, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. So the outlook is $7.5 billion, and I'll notice it. I'll say this now. The analyst had a couple of good questions here, especially Stacy Raskin from Bernstein. Hi, Stacy, if you're watching. He said that if you have a $5 billion number, that means that quarter on quarter, to meet that, your revenue for AI chips actually goes down in Q4. Lisa turned around and said, well, actually, we said 5 billion plus, not 5 billion. Yeah, as Stacey was saying, you really need about 5.2 for the full year in order to be even level, Q3 to Q4. And then Harlan Sir also made a comment that AMD might snatch 10 to 15% of the AI market next year if they continue to grow in this route, and Nvidia,
so
does similarly. Which and to be honest, at the end of the year, I said in the pre-show, I think, if Nvidia get 50 to 60 billion in AI this year and AMD get 5, that's 10% by revenue.
Well, that's actually, consider that's 10% from almost nothing.
Yeah, it's a new swim lane. So, so this, just like the Intel one, it's on more-more.com, or you can just search for more than more Substack and go through the analyst Q&A. And the analysts surprise me sometimes. They're not always the most technical, but they do poke at things that perhaps I don't consider. And so, don't get me wrong, sometimes they're absolutely meaningless questions. And sometimes they're just looking to get power back. So
sometimes I read some of the questions, I'm like, what were you trying to ask here? Because
it's we should also say that just staying on the AMD train for a second, this story quickly. AMD is going to partner with Fujitsu to develop sustainable computing infrastructure for open source AI. And I pinged George about this, and I said, this sounds like Rock'em on ARM.
So I think it's, so if you guys don't know, AMD has their software suite called Rock'em, which is essentially their version of CUDA to some degree. They have the HIP language. But if you read the LLVM commits about a year or so ago, you would notice that there was something that came up called ROCm CPU, which I believe that this is what sort of there's going to be work on ROCm CPU in conjunction with Fujitsu. Because I'm pretty sure that a lot of this software stuff can be essentially ISA agnostic. Some of it will be specific to ARM or x86, but I think a lot of it will be sort of co-developed with Fujitsu and those teams. That's sort of what I see here.
So Fujitsu has already announced Monarca. So right now, Fujitsu has the A64FX, a custom ARM processor that used to be in the #1 supercomputer in the world. I think it's like number 4 now. But the next generation, not technically a replacement because it's going to do something slightly different, is called Monarca. We saw this be actually announced at Supercomputing last year, which is the annual HPC conference. It's actually in a couple of weeks. If you're there, come say hello because George and I will be there. And it was announced it was going to be another ARM-based chip, chiplet-based, using
N2.
Yeah. Or I think they said 2 nanometer, but we can safely assume they mean N2. Here it says
I guess they could in theory mean Rapidus, but
yeah, that's the thing. It's they Monarca, I think they said was planned for 26, maybe 27.
Yeah.
Rapidus isn't going to be is the first wafers for Rapidus, which is, for those who don't know, the Japanese attempt to build a leading edge fab in partnership with IBM's 2 nanometer technology and expertise from people like Tennis Torrent and IMEC. This, I don't think, fits in time with that, but also it says with Fujitsu Monarca together with AMD Instinct accelerators. So if you're saying ROCm CPU, this means that I think they want to essentially have one code that they can compile to 2 targets.
Yes, but
that would be ideal.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, all HIP is C/C++.
Yeah. Well, yes.
C with a lot of the C++, just like CUDA is. So compiling that to a CPU, in theory, shouldn't be hard. Now, the actual underlying, all the underlying like guts, I have no idea about.
Yeah. Processor based on the ARM instruction set architecture employing cutting-edge 2 nanometer technology. This new technology applied to the Fujitsu Monarca is based on results obtained from projects subsidized by the New Energy and Industrial Technology Development Organization, NEDO, who have just awarded Tennis Torrent some money to go train some CPU architects. Separate news as well. So, yeah, that's in there. Was there... shall we put some AMD numbers up? So AMD is saying that they have some benchmark numbers for Llama CPP.
So I'm going to criticize this post from AMD.
The whole thing. So just briefly, this is AMD's numbers, so take them as AMD's numbers. They wanted to compare. They said they've now optimized their stuff and wanted to compare performance against Intel Core Ultra with Llama and with LM Studio, CPU versus CPU, tokens per second. And they're saying that their new Ryzen AI 300 series chip is 27% faster. The Intel laptop actually had faster DRAM. It's DRAM, not RAM. Hello, Dion. Yeah, this is the.
Hey, they at least use 7,500 mega transfers, not megahertz. They use mega transfers correctly here.
So that number, 27%, is based on the 1 billion parameter instruct model with 4-bit quantization. Criticism, go.
So that's actually not where my criticism lies. My criticism lies in that if you look at all these charts, they do CPU and iGPU comparisons. Where's your NPU comparison? It's not there. And my criticism, and this goes for Intel and Qualcomm as well, is the software ecosystem for these NPUs is very not good, to put it lightly. And what kills me about at least AMD specifically, I don't know about Intel or Qualcomm, is that I know for a fact that the NPU can run OpenCL. They have a compiler for OpenCL for it. They could run generalized code enough.
So
just enable it.
The argument here is that more people are willing to use the CPU without getting hands dirty about writing for an accelerator. So they're just showing what the CPU can do. As in, for time to market, it's the easiest way to get there.
Sure, but I would also argue that if you're going to set all of this up, like, have an NPU comparison, because that's what you're saying is your AI part of your chip is the NPU.
No. The messaging is, here's a chip. We will be ready whether you want to use the AI on the CPU, the GPU, or the NPU. All are supported. So Cameron Brown over on LinkedIn actually asks, what's the accuracy of the 1 billion parameter model? 75%? Ha!
Yeah.
More like 35% probably. So we'll see. Again, they don't say at a level of accuracy here. This is literally just throughput. They probably say what the input and output tokens are.
I think they do down below, but
yeah, we'll see.
Did something just fall over there?
Yeah, I knocked over my can and then knocked over my fan, of course. Yeah, and here they're using the variable graphics memory as an accelerator. So they're using AI Playground and LM Studio. If you're interested in running LLMs, go have a look at LM Studio. It's actually a very easy thing to use. However, using it on more than a CPU or an NVIDIA GPU is really difficult because you need beta hacks and variations. They haven't fully integrated other accelerators into it yet. At least last time I checked.
AMD GPUs actually run fairly okay on it, and Intel GPUs. I think the iGPU side works fairly well, but the NPU side is effectively non-existent.
So even though I've seen NPU demos use LM Studio from Intel,
yes,
I turn around and say, can I have a version of LM Studio that uses the NPU for specific models? And they're like, what? Because the person giving the demo doesn't know how the demo was written or whatever. The specimen prompt was, how long would it take for a ball to be dropped from a 10-meter height to hit the ground? Explain the concept of entropy in 5 lines. It doesn't say whether they actually outputted the right answer.
Also, the concept of entropy in 5 lines, that takes more than 5 lines.
No. Just ordered stuff go disordered.
It's not, no. Like, yes, fundamentally that's what it is, but there's a lot more there.
Oh, of course there's nuance. He didn't say no, don't have nuance. As always, AMD numbers, just like Intel numbers. Take what you will out of them. Wait for independent testing. And because we're still on AMD here, we kind of touched upon this. We've got Vcache coming soon in the next couple of days. I think the big news is the cache is on the bottom now, not on the top. I actually have a full 20-25 minute video about why cache on top versus cache on bottom, and why would you choose one over the other. You should definitely go check that out. But yeah, so it's coming. 8 cores, 16 threads, base of 4.7. That's quite nice. It's one chiplet, 8 cores, 100 total cache. That's L2 plus L3. It doesn't include the L1. It doesn't include the.
L2, 96 megs L3, but they like summing it up to one.
It doesn't include the prefetcher cache. It doesn't include the branch predictor cache.
To be fair, with regards to the L1 and the L1i, I'm pretty sure that those are inclusive to the L2. So at least for AMD, for Intel, that's not the case. So yeah, you could technically that does count the L1. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're arguing here it's the chip for gamers, 120 watt TDP, $479. That's what, $30 more, $20 more than last year.
$30 more.
And it's all Zen 5, not Zen 5C, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah, because it's
the only annoyance, as always, more PCIe lanes, please.
Yeah. By the way, Ian, are you still trying to show the LM screen?
Yeah. Sorry, I thought I'd changed. Stupid me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
here we go. I was highlighting stuff and it was on the screen. Typical.
Give me more PCIe lanes, please, and more memory speed, more bandwidth, please.
Yeah. Gunny asks, do you think AMD will change its IO die for next gen Ryzen's? Maybe stack more memory on it. There is real estate. The thing you have to realize is that the consumer market is a cost sensitive market. It can't be Lego.
Yeah.
Something you do fundamentally has to be, there has to be market demand for it. And us, as enthusiasts, building one system or two systems, aren't the target market. The OEMs building 100,000 systems are the target market for businesses and stuff like that. So will AMD change its IO die for next gen Ryzen's? I mean, 128-bit DRAM, 24 lanes PCIe Gen 5, and then some more for the chipset or whatever.
So it's 24 lanes and then 4 for the chipset.
Yeah. I don't think that's going to change soon. The only thing they'd update it with is perhaps maybe a slight revision that's better on yield, or they might be able to push something a bit, or a different memory controller that. Wait, they don't support CU DIMMs, do they?
So there's no bet. So technically, it's supported in the way that it will turn on. Let me put it to you that way. It will turn on. There's no performance benefit. If anything, there's a performance degradation.
It's not plan of record for support, but if it works, good bully. It's like ECC. It's not plan of record, but if it works, good for you.
ECC is plan of record for AMD CPUs.
No, but that DDR5 changes the game because it's a different key.
No, there are ECC
you mean
DIMMs.
Are they? Oh, for God's sake.
Yeah, they do exist, and the client CPUs do support ECC. But
you mean it says it works in the BIOS, but does somebody actually do a row hammer test?
So it's a board thing. Like, does the board support ECC?
It's like Intel. You have to have a Q series chipset to get ECC to work.
Well, it's W now.
Whatever. Back in my day.
But yeah.
So it's so yeah, there could be an update to support some, to have official support for some things like that, or a security thing.
So I think the answer to the question is, at least for changes to the IO die, will AMD support LP cams?
Yeah.
And specifically, will it support will LPDDR6 be in a place that they can adopt it? Because if that's the case, then I suspect that they'll go to LPDDR6, which sort of necessitates a move to 192-bit memory buses.
Yes, A, that's interesting. B, I guess the question is perhaps, can a DDR5 and an LPDDR6 memory controller coexist on the same chip?
Can there be a combo PHY? I don't know.
If not a combo PHY, then a muxed PHY. And by that, for those of you who don't know what I mean, is a combo PHY is basically one piece of IP, one design that supports both. A muxed PHY would essentially have a separate DDR5 and LPDDR6 controller, and depending on what board you put it in when it boots up, it will decide which one to use, and the other one will just be turned off. So combo versus mux. A combo is better area efficiency, but a combo can only exist if the technologies can be combined. So DDR2 and DDR3 and DDR3 and DDR4 would technically combo. You can technically combine them. Though DDR4 and DDR5, you can't. I think they have to be muxed.
So Chris Jackson in the chat, do they require different bit widths? Per channel, yes. But I don't know if you can do some stuff with how the PHY, if you can do masking on the PHYs and stuff like that. I don't know.
So my question was more, if you can buy a chip and put it in either a DDR5 board or an LPDDR6 board. And then you get that differentiation like we have with Alder Lake, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
That rather than having a chip that is the Ryzen whatever for LPDDR, and then you have the same version for DDR because the memory controller has to be distinct and separate. Motherboard differences also confuse the market to no end, and I know the motherboard vendors hate it. So, yeah, and the concept of a channel doesn't really exist anyway. It's so one thing to. Can we get another link for number 10, Dom? Let's okay. Let's do this one next. How much have you been following new Apple Silicon?
I haven't really. I know that they came out. Unfortunately, these were being launched as I was coming back from the US, and then I had to deal with Arrow Lake and Zelshin. So I've been kind of busy and I haven't really been paying attention. Yeah.
You said US.
I bet UK.
George travels. Yeah, so alongside the M4 that was launched a little while ago at the iPad event, we now have the M4 Pro and the M4 Max, and we now have notebooks for them to go in. So second generation 3 nanometer, which I assume is N3E.
N3E.
Yeah. Same thing that Apple tends to do, gen on gen improvements. They're saying, faster cores, ray tracing engine. The M4 Pro and the M4 Max enable Thunderbolt 5 for the first time. So it's going to be the first chip with Thunderbolt 5 support. the way Thunderbolt is working with Thunderbolt 5. So technically it's an open standard, but Intel still has some grip on it. Intel has said that Intel has launched controllers for Thunderbolt 5, but hasn't integrated it into a chip design yet, whereas it looks like Apple is. I assume this is integrated and not.
Isn't Lunar Lake Thunderbolt 5?
No, it's Thunderbolt 4. Thunderbolt 5 support is enabled through a controller. You may want to check on that. I'm pretty sure it isn't. Because I remember it being asked. It's the same with Arrow, I think. Yeah, so more neural engine. Apple is usually so vague with its chip design. Yeah, so the M4 starts off at 10-core CPU, 10-core GPU. In this case, we've got a 4 plus 6 design, so 4 big cores, 6 efficiency cores, with built-in machine learning acceleration in the core, which just means wide vector pipes and what have you. And here they're focused specifically on the performance cores having larger reorder buffers. Now, Apple historically has a massive reorder buffer, so the fact that they're improving it another 40%, is impressive. 32 gigabytes of unified memory. Sorry,
I did check, and Lunar Lake is just Thunderbolt 4. I was mistaken.
Good. Yeah. 32 gigs unified memory for M4 at 120 gig per second. So that's just a standard 128-bit interface. But has 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports. So M4 only has Thunderbolt 4. Then we move on to the Pro. And instead of a 4 plus 6, we get a 10 plus 4. Makes perfect sense. Of course it does. Similar sort of similar core to the M4. And instead of a 10-core GPU, we get a 20-core GPU. These two are different silicon. It's pretty obvious that they're different silicon. And this supports double memory at 273 gigabytes per second. So not only is this a wider bus, but it's also supporting faster memory. And they've doubled the bandwidth, and they have the faster M4 neural engine and Thunderbolt 5 native support. Then we have the Max, and we wonder, is there going to be an Ultra? I don't know. This is a 12 plus 4 design instead of a 10 plus 4 with a 40-core GPU, and this must also be a separate
I believe so. I think that these are 3 independent pieces.
Yeah.
Potentially the Ultra would be made up of 2 Maxes, but we'll have to see.
Yeah. People haven't deleted to see if there's a Dicey interconnect here. The main reason why we're saying these are different pieces of silicon is because you can't design a 10, 20, and 40 core GPU and be area efficient on M3, right? With that amount of redundancy. Now, you could do a super one, but it would have to have one that would do all of them, but it'd have to have on silicon 12 performance cores, 6 efficiency cores, and 40 GPU cores, and then you just bin down. That would just be very inefficient for the amount of chips that Apple has to produce. It just makes more sense to design 3 and be efficient that way. 120 gigs of, again, fast unified memory, doubling the bus again, and then enhanced media engine. So the point here is that it accelerates all the Apple formats like ProRes, and it does it natively on the SoC, so you don't have to use any sort of extra GPU work. And then we have Apple Intelligence. Yay! What else did AI stand for? It's to a certain extent they're trying to compete against Microsoft's Copilot, right? Who does it better? But we know Microsoft has a bunch of GPUs. What is Apple using?
So I don't remember if they have. I think they do have an NPU. No, they do. They absolutely do. What we're talking about. But they also, so with the M4 generation of core, they have SME, which is ARM scalable matrix extensions, which came out of Apple's AMX, not to be confused with Intel AMX, which were also matrix operations. But in terms of what the actual model it's running under, Mr. Viptis says Apple Intelligence is a ChatGPT wrapper, but
that would cost $20 per month per user. I don't think that's sustainable. I mean, Apple could pay it, sure.
Yeah.
What George was referring to was what I set up here with next generation ML accelerators. They're actually built into the core. That's what SME is. And then we have new MacBook Pros with a chip. Part of me is always tempted to get one, but then I can never justify, pivoting my whole existence over. But people are excited in the Mac Mini.
The Mac Mini looks quite nice.
So 599 gets you the base level, 16 gig DRAM and 256 gig storage.
Hey, 16 gigs is standard. Woo!
16 gigs is now standard across the range. People are saying, how many years did it take? And then extrapolating, that's when the that's when the next update. I'm trying to find it. I'm trying to find it. Is it going to be on here? No.
I was going to make a joke about how Apple didn't have the courage to remove the headphone jack from the Mac Mini. There it is.
Yeah, the power button is now on the bottom.
Yes. Why? I have no idea.
To make the external look sleeker, because you can just put your finger underneath to turn it on and off, to which people are saying, why are you turning your system off? There have already been extensive 3D prints of devices you can put on your Mac Mini to turn it on and off. So
only Apple could engineer something like this.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. It's like having the power button on your monitor behind and not on the front. Because that happened like a few years ago. Monitors started putting all the power buttons behind.
You know where my power button on my monitor is? It's right here on top. It's great.
So yeah. So it's as you can imagine, we weren't necessarily there at the launch. We don't get invited to these things. There has been some Geekbench numbers already, but take it what you will. 4,000 for Geekbench 6 on Mac. I'm always wary of looking at Geekbench numbers on Mac because of the compilers and such. But I think Intel and Qualcomm are getting about 3,600, and MediaTek's in there in the mix as well. So single core performance is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing we should probably highlight if you're interested. Speaking about lots of GPUs.
Yes. This was a cool video.
Yeah, so we all know that there are several companies building 100,000 GPU AI data centers out there. We've mentioned a few of them. One of the others is XAI, which is the Musk company. And our good friend Patrick Kennedy over at Serve the Home got to go in one of the, I'll say this carefully, one of the facilities holding a quarter of the cluster. So at this location here, there are four, not buildings, but four segments with 25,000 GPUs each with their own independent power delivery and everything. And Patrick got a chance to go around in partnership with Supermicro, because Supermicro is basically selling the systems. We could go into all the mess that Supermicro is going through now. And Dom, if you can put a link in the document to do with that. I think we also need another link for number 10, just because I don't think the links you've got there are worth looking at. But yeah, it's Patrick rarely does sponsor videos. He did one that had to be approved by the Olympic Committee with Intel in Paris, and this one with Supermicro. So he had to be vague about what he saw. Everything had to be checked. He told me it had to go through Elon, and at some level he believes also Jensen saw it. So
I wouldn't be surprised considering how big of that cluster is.
But the whole point is it's entirely liquid cooled. I've seen these systems at Supermicro. That they're essentially 6U. So you have 4 for the GPU, 2 for the CPU, and then you have essentially another 2U on top. That is your liquid reservoir blade thing. That's where a lot of stuff goes on. And of course, you have to build it and network it. I can't remember if they're using InfiniBand here or Ethernet. We'll get down there eventually. This is what we saw at Supercomputing last year. I made a video on this. Supermicro sponsored a couple of videos while I was out there last year. Technically, it was NVIDIA's money for co-marketing that they spent on me. I don't think they're spending any this year because they haven't reached out. And inside, it kind of looks like this on the CPU side. But you definitely go look at Patrick's video. He speaks about the coolant units. He speaks about the power distribution. And I want to see if I can find, this is the rear door heat exchangers. So it's not all nice what you saw. Where's the storage? Because of course you've got something like this, you have to have massive amounts of flash storage. This is petabytes of flash. It's just insane. They're using Ethernet here. 400 gig Ethernet. Using Bluefield 3. They must be using Spectrum X switches. And this all looks very nice and pretty. You can tell it's been installed properly. And then, of course, I couldn't even afford the cables.
Yeah, no.
That's how big and bad it is. And here's the cooling. Here's some of the stuff he can't show you with the electrical infrastructure. And these are mega packs ready for installation. The only shot he got of these was literally them being covered. That's how secretive they were about all of this. I'm surprised he was even allowed to post that video.
Yeah.
Or that section of the video. It's Patrick and I was talking. So given the amount of Elon Musk fans and Nvidia fans out there, this has got to be like a million view video, easy.
How many so far?
Initially, it didn't do that well. It took like 6 hours for it to pick up. It's now at 250,000 after 8 days. Which I think will
that's not as high as I was expecting. You're right. I was expecting you at 1 million by now.
but it's his 14th biggest video.
Yeah. So I say that because I know that for a very long time, the most viewed article on CNC was the Tesla Jojo article we did.
Mm. Yeah.
So
yeah. So give it another day, and this video will easily be top 10 because Patrick has a bunch of videos. All in the same. Yeah, it's like 256, 255, 243. This is already 251. Then it's a step up. You can see it's always these mini. Mini micro.
I said to him that the Super Mini Micro should come back because it was great. I loved it.
I think he ran out of systems. Because once you go through like the previous 3 generations and the next 2, you have to wait for new launches, essentially.
Yeah.
This is like the SSD NAS from Asus tour. That was pretty cool. That one got It's Better, the best mini PC today. I remember that. It's a B-Link GTR.
Yep.
The Epic with all the Vcache and the Bergamo ones. And this is his roundup of all the sub $70 fanless 2.5 gig switches with 10 gig Ethernet. It seems like 10 gig Ethernet gets a lot of traffic. It did at Antec, let me tell you that.
Yeah.
People still want that.
I just moved to Oregon or Washington where you can get Ziply with 50 gig internet.
Yeah.
But yeah, so do you
Can we get another link for Arrow Lake, Don?
Well, I was going to say, do you want to move on to Arrow Lake? Because I can provide some of the numbers that we've run so far for spec.
I just want to bring up something for people to look at. I just need better links than those.
Do you want Phoronix?
Actually, let's do this one in the interim, just because it's interesting, and I do want to do a video about this. Text bar. So wafers. How? Right, we know that the dimension is 300 mil diameter, but how thick do you think they are?
Aren't they about, once it's all said and done, about 50 to 100 micron?
Yeah, they're perhaps more around the 100 micron. It depends whether you're stacking stuff, and given that we're talking about Vcache earlier and thinning, you do have to sometimes thin these dies and bond them together. And over the years, I've seen some ridiculously thin wafers, because when you go thin, you get bendy. Infineon now has a process of making your silicon wafer 20 microns thick, uniform.
That's impressive.
Basically, don't let Linus hold this one. I don't think it's like floppy in the term of flexible like that. Why do you need this? Well, chiplets and stacking, and also if you, in this case, deployed in DC to DC conversion. When you have a thinner layer, obviously you're relying on other stuff for heat dissipation, and if you're doing DC to DC conversion, maybe that's something that you need to be interested in. They're going to be at Electronica in Munich next week. I will be at Electronica on Wednesday. As in, I'm literally flying there in the morning and coming back in the evening.
Oh, so it's literally a day trip.
Yeah, my flight is like 6:30 in the morning. I get there at 9. I get there for when the show opens around 10. Yeah, and then I'll be leaving as the show floor closes. I've already spoken to Infineon about this, so I'm hoping to get some time where I can at least talk about it. I don't think they will let me touch it, because chances are they will only have one, maybe two, and realistically they need it as demonstration for other things. That being said,
so you won't be able to test the crispiness?
No, it's what they probably do is they keep it in a normal wafer package, which is like a perspex thing.
Yeah,
and that's how somebody carries it around, and they only get it out for very specific reasons. One reason is to put it on a pedestal, put it in a presentation case that they then put a lid on for the show floor event. So it's yeah. I do have a bendy wafer. It's somewhere here, but it's plastic. It's from the company that makes the plastic wafers. I think they're called Pragmatic in the UK. I have one of those, but silicon wafer that's bendy. That should be interesting. I'll do a video on that and get some more details. By halving the wafer's thickness, Infineon has managed to slash substrate resistance by 50%, which leads to a 15% less power loss compared to other solutions. If you're doing DC to DC conversion, that's a lot of everything. So yeah, let's go to Arrow Lake. This is the other launch, and this is probably one of the last things we'll do
launches
today
for the year.
Yeah. No.
Stop singing sad. Yeah. Covered content.
So the way to do this is you inspect it, you then find out where it is, and you delete element, and then you try and find what was left, and then you delete element again. There we go, and then you find out where the add is.
And then there's oh my god.
Did it re-pop up?
Yes, it did.
Okay, that disappeared. Why won't that disappear? You can't even zoom in to make it look better on the screen. Is there a mobile version? Oh, great, Phoronix. Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Can't even minimize this thing at the bottom.
I have to admit to using an ad block. Just because
it's that's the left. Can I do that? Okay. Don't come back. Okay, here we go. So yeah, this is desktop Arrow Lake. You've got chips, and you've got chips add.
It
here. You got chips. It took a while for you to get a board. I think you ended up having to buy one at retail.
I'm actually returning one of the boards because it nearly bricked both of my chips. I will stand by my video. Now
you've got it to come.
I'll stand by my video that it should not have released in this state. It took me way too long to bring the system online. And it was just a headache. Now that it's up and running, it's been pretty good.
So did you find out what
getting
the
it
issue
up and running? So one of the issues was, I'm pretty sure. So apparently, a issue with Arrow Lake is that the management engine, if you can't train the memory, it will cause itself to just sort of break and die. So you have to reset the BIOS and do a reflash.
So, as in it corrupts the BIOS.
Yeah, basically, the ME just decides it doesn't want to. It won't work, and you have to reflash the BIOS.
So for people wondering what's going on, when you put in a new CPU into a system for the first time, and if you're buying even a pre-built system, if you're buying a pre-owned motherboard, if you're putting a new chip in that the system recognizes is different, it will test the memory, and this is what we call training, and it goes through a process of trying to find the right values for all the timing aspects of the memory in order to speak to the CPU properly. And normally that takes a long time, and that's why your first boot can sometimes take a while. It also takes longer the more memory you have, and if you've got dual rank and all that sort of stuff. What the system then does is essentially saves those values so that when you boot the next time, it does a much shorter test to verify those values are accurate, and that's more like a fast boot scenario. What George is describing here is that during the slow test, the chip and the memory and the motherboard couldn't organize a full communication and get those timings right. So as a result, erroneous data was essentially written to the BIOS in that profile that forced it to not start up again unless you flash the BIOS using a tool like BIOS flashback.
Yeah, and the thing with Arrow Lake is that
this is just George, by the way. It's one person.
Yeah, the management engine on Arrow Lake was moved. So on previous generations, it was on the PCH. Now it's on the CPU itself. Now it's on the SoC tile. But you have anyway. Once I got that all restarted, I found out, thanks to I was in a VC with a whole bunch of folks. Brutus in the VC was like, because I didn't have both EPS plugs plugged in, because normally you don't need those. So he's like, why don't you plug both in? So I plugged both in, and that worked. Now I've confirmed that you need both plugged in, but that was the final sort of thing that.
Again, what George is saying is when you build these systems, one of the cables you put in from the power supply is it can either be in 4-pin or 8-pin. Usually these days it's 8-pin. And it's called the EPS 12-volt connector. It's different to the PCIe connector because
that's 6+2 in the pin route is different.
Yeah, they're keyed so you can't get them wrong. Normally, up to now, most motherboards have one of those 8-pin EPS 12-volt connectors. On high-end motherboards, you often saw two, though the point of two was to help with, say, overclocking and deliver more power or more even power. In George's situation, what motherboard was it?
This is the MSI Pro Z890-A Wi-Fi.
So normally you can either put one in, the first one, or the second one, or both. But it should work in any. And what George is saying is that he had to put both in in order to get it to work, which sounds a bit weird to me. That sounds more like an issue with the BIOS not being ready.
Potentially.
But yeah.
Also, I see that Jeff from Craft Computing has joined us in chat.
Better late than never, Jeff. So the Arrow Lake, just so we're clear, this is the desktop version or the new desktop platform from Intel. They're calling it the 200S series, Core Ultra 200S. It features the same P cores and E cores as Lunar Lake. However, it's packaged more in a Meteor Lake type environment for desktop. So as a result, we have 8 P cores, 16 E cores, lots of cache. We have shared L3 this time. There's no LPE cores or anything that was in Meteor Lake. But it's also multiple tiles. So we have a compute tile and an I/O tile and a graphics tile, all built at TSMC, but packaged at Intel. And they're following the same lines as they did with Lunar Lake, with the performance, leadership, CPU performance. But the key thing here was meant to be power. With N3, using TSMC N3, no longer are we having 100 degrees Celsius, 250 watt chips. We now have 70 degrees Celsius, 250 watt chips. Running at high performance. This is using Foveros Intel Advanced Packaging. There is a filler tile. There's a base tile that's built on Intel. And also, they're still using the same GPU in Meteor Lake. So this isn't XE2 like in Luna. This is XE1. Mm-hmm. This is Alchemist, not Battle Mage. So that hasn't been updated or upgraded. To put you in mind, Lunar Lake was meant to come out next year, Q1. It came out 6 months early because it was ready. So we would have seen a more natural cadence of things. But yeah, no, they're saying, better than AMD's 9950X in a variety of standard tests. And the big change, I think, here for consumers is no hyper-threading. So all these cores are 1 thread per core. Mm-hmm. So at the top, the Ultra 9 285K, you have 8 performance cores, 16 efficiency cores, for a total of 24 cores and 24 threads. It does have an onboard NPU, but it's Meteor Lake. So while this is a PC that does AI, it's not Microsoft's definition of AI PC. It is Intel's definition of AI PC because it does AI. Mm-hmm. And the frequencies here aren't hitting the same 6 gigahertz as they were before. It's now 5.755. They're talking about max. They didn't put the base frequency on here. Lots of information not on here. And part of that is just because it's TSMC as well, right? Yeah. They have to optimize for a different process. Also using industry standard EDA tools, Cadence, Synopsys, which is going to be the basis of what we said earlier with Panther Lake and 18A. So all of that. And their point here is that you should be able to get the same performance as last gen for lower power. In this case, 80 watts. So this is probably running at about 250. This is running at 170. And the whole thing is gaming performance is about equal, but power is a lot less. And as a result, you get more efficiency. Turns out reviewers don't like that. They want higher performance and lower power and lower temperatures all in one. Mm-hmm. You can't have one or the other. Think about AI and pricing. The big thing here is people are going to put this Ultra 9 285K up against the X3D that's coming out in a couple of days. They're going to say $100 less, which performs better in gaming. Place your bets in the chat.
So now the general consensus of this launch was that it's not. So in my experience, this launch has not been very smooth. It's been unusually rocky for Intel. Usually Intel has some very stable platforms. Granted, they've had some squibbles in the past with, like, if you remember, X79 SATA had some issues. X99 had some launch issues.
That was P67, by the way.
Oh, with P67, sorry. But
they're usually not game breaking.
Yeah, but in this case, I was having, not just myself, but a few others were having just issues just with booting the thing, which is not common for Intel platforms. Now, I do have some data.
Isn't this is a new socket?
New socket.
But people are saying it may only be around for one generation.
Yes, because there was a Meteor Lake S.
Right. That was expected to go in this first, but that got canned.
Yes, that got canned.
So normally a new motherboard tends to be stable unless there is significant change. And I think the change here from the previous gen, Raptor Lake and Raptor Lake Refresh, is the move to the tiled architecture, right? Because you now have a tiled architecture, the power delivery and how you deliver the power significantly changes.
Yes.
So Meteor Lake on that platform would have had some of those issues. And when we typically see issues with a new platform, it's a DDR transition, for example. In this case, it's a significant packaging transition. And now where the control comes in differs. Intel had stability 6th gen, 7th gen, 8th gen, 9th gen, 10th gen, because it was all essentially the same platform with the same memory controller, just with a slightly different pinout to make you buy a new motherboard every couple of generations. With this case, it's the fact that you have the power delivery difference. And I even think the motherboards in this case, you can either use the onboard power or you can use the power bypass. And overclocking systems use the power bypass because it gives them greater control over certain things that overclockers need. That obviously costs extra to put onto your motherboard. Motherboards are only ever getting more and more expensive. I mean, the ASRock OC formula is what, $1,000 now?
I think it's like 600, 700.
I remember when they used to be 200.
Yeah.
I have here. You can't see it. Z77 OC formula, Z87 OC formula, Z87M OC formula. I've got the Z97 OC formula around here. The only one I don't have is the Z170M, because I passed on it because I felt like I'd done too many OC formulas. But apparently that's the one that everybody wants. That's the rare one. So it's, but that's not unique to Intel. AMD motherboard pricing also ridiculous.
Yeah.
So it's, I've got an X8070E.
At 600 on Newegg.
I've got, what's the X87 870E Tai Chi?
I think that's like 400, 500.
Yeah. I mean, we're at a point now where motherboards equal CPU pricing. It's insane.
Newegg says 450. Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I bought my EX58 UD3R for my Nehalem i7 920 for about 130. That's a high-end desktop platform for 130 bucks motherboard.
Yeah.
This is Arrow Lake. When do you think your review will be live, George?
So there's one. There's a couple of reviews in the pipe at the moment, but this should be probably sometime next week, hopefully.
Yeah.
Don't.
Is that a written review or a video?
It's going to be a written review. But since I'm here, I'll share some of the numbers if you don't mind.
Sure.
So we have some spec numbers, and I'll compare to I had it here. Okay. So I would recommend just pulling up like a note sheet so that people don't. Yeah. Okay. Now, let me set the memory configurations for all three of these systems. The Arrow Lake system is running DDR5 6400 CL 323939. The Zen 5 system is running 6000 323939, and the Raptor Lake system is running JDEC 3600. The reason for JDEC 3600 is because it's running 128 gigs of RAM, and that's the rated JDEC spec for quad rank setup.
So the others are 64 gig.
No. The Arrow Lake is 48 and the Zen 5 is 96.
Okay. That's some nice consistency there.
I said 48 for Arrow Lake. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, welcome to what happens when the Raptor Lake system is a test system, is a system in a rack.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually doing actual work. Yep. So, but the data that I have is Lion Cove scored 11.2 in integer and 16.9 in spec FP at 5.7 gigahertz. That's Lion Cove. Skymont, because we had enough time to test both, scored 8.85 in int and 12.8 in FP at 4.6, which is that.
So say that again.
8.85 in int and 12.8 in FP.
Yeah.
At 4.6. Zen 5, so this is a 9950X, scored 11.5 int and 18.7 at 5.7.
Yep.
And Raptor Lake, Raptor Cove scored 11.2 in int and 17.1 in FP at 5.7 to 5.8. That was slightly more variable. And Gracemont scored 7.07 int and 7.39 FP at 4.4.
So Zen 5. The Arrow Lake, I assume, was Ultra 9.
Yeah, it was the Ultra 9 285.
Okay, and Raptor Lake was the 14900K.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep.
So Raptor to Lion is essentially no difference.
Yeah.
Gracemont to Skymont is a good difference, especially in FP.
The FP uptick is actually really nice. The int FP is not quite the 32 that Intel was saying, but
yeah. And the Zen 5 just wins.
Yes. Now it wins even harder when you enable SMT and you run 2 threads just to see the SMT difference. It's like 14.4 int and 22.5 FP. It just sort of takes Arrow Lake out for a ride.
Yeah, but you're running 2 threads versus 1 thread. But
yes.
we had this argument with WCCF like 5 years ago.
Yes.
You know, when you say per core performance, are you saying per core or per thread? Their argument was, well, no, it's per core. So 2 threads per core. So I'm going to run Cinebench on 2 threads.
Yeah, that's we did SMT just to see what the difference was, just to like how much more can you get out of it. It more as a funny than anything else, right? What's the gain? What does it look like?
Yeah.
Than actual.
The other degree of freedom that would be nice, and I know it's really difficult to do, is power.
Yeah.
It's that yeah, there are ways. It's difficult. So unless you want to tool up a system, but then you got to tool up all the systems.
Yeah.
And it's. I do wonder how much of the FP uplift is due to the memory.
Yeah.
Because especially MCF.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have the breakdown for. I can send you these two scores though.
So what I'm asking here is when you run Spec 2017, there's what 22 tests, of which there's 10 integer and 10 FP, and they're all given.
I think there's like 10 integer and 12 of. There's more FP tests than there are integer tests, but yeah,
sure. But
I sent you the Lion Cove results.
Where did you send them?
In DMs.
Which DM?
In Discord.
Okay, Discord DMs. Okay.
Because they're just.
Oh, I'm downloading an update, of course. Yeah, no. The point I'm trying to say is, okay, so there are tests. There's integer tests and FP tests. Integer just means whole number. FP means fractional numbers, and the way you compute them is different. All the tests are given a number that starts with a 5 in Spec 2017, and and they have names like I can never pronounce
GCC is one of them, and then there's XY, and then B waves, and a whole bunch of them. Now,
so the thing is, I know for a fact that MCF is very cache and memory.
It is
dependent. I think it's 529, if my memory serves me correctly.
So, just as a note for these tests, it says invalid run. Ignore that because it's just.
Oh, you actually submit them?
No, it just says invalid on over top of it. It's because it's having a fit about the stupid flags.
No, sorry. Sorry. WCF is an integer one. Okay. I'm thinking WRF maybe or LBM
potentially.
Well, it's let me.
505 is MCF.
Yeah. Okay. So it looks. Don't ignore it says invalid run. Yeah. Spec has rules and stuff.
That's just because it's not picking up the flag file.
Yeah.
It's ignore that. It's consistent. Trust me.
So the point here is that this is the MSI. So this would be.
So this is the MSI board. It's
Yeah. And you get a score of 12.8, and these are all the subtests with the ratio and the time taken. This is what the results look like. So I don't output them like that the way I do it. I haven't run it in a while though, actually. So we'll see. Yeah. The thing is, certain tests will be will have this set of instructions. Other tests have this set of instructions. There is argument as to how real world these tests are. They were derived from real world benchmarks and data, though, as you probably guess, Spec 2017 means 2017. And the people behind who curates these tests, they're long-time industry experts, so they may not be leading edge of what's needed in software land. Before Spec 2017 was Spec 2006. So if it's plus 11, then maybe
then we'll do another one in 2028.
Yeah. And yeah, I have seen documents this week from a leading 3-letter company for some of their portfolio, and some of their future predicted hardware, and they compare spec 2006 expected results.
I could guess which company I can guess which company this is.
But yeah, it's
because there's only one 3-letter company that would still be focused on that.
We'll discuss it afterwards. But yeah, it's so spec 2006 is still relevant in a number of circles. So yeah, keep tuned for George's Arrow Lake article. Are you doing the 9 and the 5 or just the 9?
Just the 9. I'm probably going to compare to Zen 5 and to Raptor Lake in spec because we've already done the architecture. Though I will do cache latencies because that's different from Lunar Lake. But with Lunar Lake, we did do we did the architecture deep dives.
Yeah.
Clam did, Chester.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So with that, let's move into the Q&A portion, given that we're coming up to the start of this recording, 3 hours. And the first one I want to bring up is from Nori. Thanks for the $5 super chat. We'll take that in the amusement it was intended. How long before the United Kingdom becomes 51st, 52nd, 53rd, and 54th states of the USA? For as long as I have socialized healthcare, no. What's more likely to happen is Puerto Rico and Guam, and isn't there I always forget
DC.
the third one.
It would be DC.
DC get statehood. Given all the rhetoric that happened around Puerto Rico last week, and people not realizing that Puerto Ricans are citizens of the United States.
Yeah.
Is it John Oliver has a good video on this about citizenship for territories and how even Guam, you're not technically a citizen, you're a resident, but not a citizen. I think that may have been fixed since it was done. It's
weird.
Anyway. Mind you, there are people who question if people from New Mexico aren't actually Mexicans.
Yeah,
that's a real thing.
Yeah.
So it's amusing as it is. There are actual disenfranchised people in the US that need attention. And pay tax without representation, and that's not right. So yeah, it's going back through here. There are some comments, one from DHoop44 and another one from Tappy about would Intel fire Pat? And if so, who would take over? One, I don't think they would. There may be some disagreements with some members of the board. Lip Bhutan, who's the CEO of Walden International, he left the board in September or August, and I was at an event the next day where he presented. There are differences of an opinion. If Pat was to ever get the boot, it would. I don't know who would take over, who could follow through with a plan that leads to success.
Yeah,
I'm not saying there isn't anyone. I'm just saying names that would come to mind.
Still.
Well, yeah, it's Jensen Huang.
Jensen Huang. Yeah.
So, Mark Papermaster. It's there are a few people who could take up that role, and if it wasn't an engineer, it would be essentially there would be Intel would end up having to rely on external foundry for leading edge going on. So, yeah, no, Pat's also said he's in it for the long haul. I know Morris Chang from TSMC spoke about, well, Pat's only got 2 years left until he hits Intel retirement age when he took the job. They actually modified Intel's retirement age as a result, so that wouldn't affect him. So, Americancosworth says, do you see the idea being floated to ensure that Intel IP survives if Intel goes belly up by merging it with AMD via government intervention? So here's the thing. The license sharing agreement between AMD and Intel, due to all the issues that Intel made for AMD, trying to hide the architecture, that 10-year license ran out a few years ago. It doesn't technically exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't really a license sharing agreement. It was a we won't sue you for what you design agreement.
Yeah. It was don't look too hard and we'll let bygones be bygones, essentially.
Or if you if we end up designing the same thing, we won't go after you if we were first.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's not a cross-licensing agreement. So what does that mean for the IP? There's, in order for anybody else to use any of these designs or architecture, you would essentially have to tease apart that agreement. Who owns what? Who licensed who's from what? So that's why Intel licensing x86 couldn't really be a thing, because it's so intertwined with what AMD does and this agreement, which has ended, but is still gentlemanly in that sense, in the classic sense of the word. Would Intel IP survive? AMD doesn't need it, because AMD can do its own thing. I mean, AMD made AVX 512 work for them without a license from Intel.
Mm-hmm.
And again, no cross-licensing agreement. It was, we did it, and it's compatible.
Well, less cross-licensing, but that's not quite how that all worked, as far as I understand.
Either way, I think the only thing the government would want to do is decide what IP is specifically Intel's,
mm-hmm.
and what could they charge AMD for if the government wanted to annoy AMD.
Yeah.
In that instance. So, yeah, it's yeah, okay, that's all the questions we had reserved. So if you've got any more, do stick them up in the in the chat. Tristan asks what the odds Intel and AMD are forced by the government to open up x86 to other companies. Actually, one way this could work is if Intel and AMD set up a joint venture, and technically all the licenses are owned by the joint venture, and then the joint venture is then the source to go license them out. What are the odds that Intel and AMD are going to be forced to do that? None. They have.
I still wonder what exactly the advisory group is going to do.
Well, we covered on this. Did we speak about this last time, or was that in the middle?
I don't remember.
I need to check the date on this. To make sure we're just not repeating ourselves.
Yeah.
No, I did a video. I didn't write about it. Having too many brands.
Apparently we did. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's like I said back then. The main benefit of that advisory council is security. post-quantum crypto and that sort of stuff, but also Pluton and whatever. A compute concern would be reduced precision. FP formats, which FP8s are we going with? Are we going with Huawei's FP8 or with somebody else's FP8? Or are we doing posits now or whatever? Aside from that, it's still super long term. One of the benefits is that I don't think Intel's going to do another AVX 512 bum rush it out the door and then do lackluster support long term. So, yeah. Actually, Goonie 1972 asks, would that joint venture not infringe on monopoly laws? No, because it's a monopoly on x86, but it's not a monopoly in the ecosystem for architecture. ARM and RISC-V, right? The whole point of a monopoly is that one doesn't get 70%. And if and the fact that there's still two companies deploying x86 products, you could say, well, are they derivatives of a singular company? Or actually, no, there's different implementations, but the license to go use that instruction, is given to Intel and given to AMD, that sort of thing. So I don't think it's fine. Chris Jackson asks, AVX 2048 when? Already exists. It's called SVE.
No. So actually, I do want to. I'm sorry, but
conceptually, it does.
Not even.
It's in the spec. It's not in silicon.
No. I mean, both are technically vector instructions. They're both SIMD instructions, but
CNS.
No. NCore was not at all anything x86. But slightly more real world. I am surprised that AVX 1024 doesn't exist. And hear me out on this. It's not about the compute width per se. It's about how, so with Zen 5 and with Intel Server, they have two 512-bit FMAs. And it's going to be easier to feed those FMAs with 1024-bit instructions than with two 512-bit instructions. So I wouldn't be surprised to see an AVX 1024 or realistically an AVX 10.3-1024 spec, not necessarily for the additional bit width, but to reduce the number of instructions that you need to feed to the back
end. We're all moving towards custom ASICs, isn't that right?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. So just general thing. I wouldn't mind going back to a consumer CPU, sorry, a mainstream. It's just that right now I have my system, my high-end desktop. Yeah, okay, it's Threadripper. I have my GPU. I have a 4x4 M.2 add-in card. I have another PCIe drive in there. On the board itself, I never have another 3 M.2s. I also have a capture card in there. And realistically, if I had a consumer system, I wouldn't be able to put all that in, especially the 4 M.2s. Right now, that's serving as the backbone for the TechTechPotato video storage, one I have synced to the cloud and whatever, because we keep flirting with the 10 billion. The 10 terabytes I mean, I have to keep converting stuff to AV1 in order to make sure I don't hit it. It's when you have need of that, but you still want the high performance. Yeah.
Here's an extra $2,000 on top of your cost. Thank you.
Yeah, it's
what I want more PCIe. Like, give me 48 lanes. Or and you have Hawktan to blame for this. Even if it was just 32 5.0 with 16 going into a PCIe switch, I would be fine with that. But
yeah, if PCIe switches were consumer priced, then yeah, I wouldn't mind, because then I can get a we used to have back in the day, was it an 80 lane? So you'd have a 16 in, 64 out.
Yeah.
Right. And okay, the PCIe switch was $100 to put on the motherboard, back when motherboards with PCIe switches, and I've got several here, literally
$200, $250,
more like $350, $400. If you wanted the full fat, ones. Not now, where you've got $400 and you end up with two PCIe slots.
What I will say, and this may be a hot take,
it's because Broadcom bought PLX.
Yes.
God damn it.
Yes. Yeah. No. SSDs don't need 4 lanes anymore.
No.
They could get away with 2 5.0 lanes, and that would get you back some of that PCIe expansion.
Yeah. If SSD vendors sold PCIe 5x2 drives at suitable sizes,
Samsung actually kind of does. They have a weird like PCIe 4.0 X4 that's also 5.0 X2.
Yeah, but okay, there's no. You also need the CPU to support by 2 bifurcation. Intel
AMD
doesn't
does.
do that. AMD does.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah.
Point there.
Yeah. It's the 990 Evo. That's my problem. I'm all 990 Pros. Because I found 4 terabyte drives really cheap. If you get them on sale, they can be really cheap. That's another thing. Maybe this just pisses me off. Since we're going into late show now. NVMe SSDs have been 8 terabytes at the high end for far too long.
So I have a board that had. I wish more boards had slim SAS with PCIe, so that I could just put U.2 drives or U.3 now into a system.
The problem with that is there are so many slim SAS standards, and also the cable. Some cables are bidirectional, some cables are unidirectional. If you want a breakout cable, you got to make sure whether you're doing a break in or a breakout cable, and then trying to find the right SFF number for what you need is a bloody minefield.
Absolutely. That's honestly they need. Oh boy. Yeah.
And then some other cables, but then on top of that, you also have Oculink. Oh, here's another thing that comes in this board.
They need to. But my point here is we need to have a proper SATA replacement that isn't that's at the same speed as PCIe. That's not an absolute ball like to figure out.
So SATA Express.
No, SATA Express was an external thing.
No.
Was it not? I thought it was.
You're thinking about eSATA. eSATA and SATA Express are different.
I get the two confused all the time.
Does anybody remember SATA Express, where no drives used it? Or Chris Jackson says maybe there were two. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need to bring back 5 1/4 panel drives with E1S. You know what, Dom? You're not wrong.
But where's the 3.5 drives that are all flash? Where's my 30? Well, I know where it is. It's made by a company called Nimbus Data.
Is it actually made?
Oh, they have 100 terabyte 3.5-inch drive.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Well, now we're getting like 61 terabyte 2.5 inches. So
they've been around for a while. The 100 terabyte 3.5-inch was actually launched 4 years ago. Linus did a video on it 3 years ago, and Nimbus Data still show it off every year at Supercomputing. I remember doing a small video at their booth last year at Supercomputing, and the guy who's there, he's nice, but he doesn't follow up on anything. You have to be proactive. So he was like, we'll send you a 16 terabyte, 2.5-inch drive for you to play with. I'm like, yeah, it's cool. But then I never followed up, and he never followed up. And Gunny says he still has, they still have some 15K RPM Raptor-X drives. Me too. The question is, do you have the ones with a see-through panel or not? Because I only did the see-through panel in the small sizes, 300 gig, 600 gig. If you wanted the 1.5 terabyte, it was all a solid one. I spent £200 for a 300 gigabyte drive back in the day, but it was 15K RPM. So my Battlefield 2 loading times beat everybody else's.
The most important metric.
Battlefield 2? Yeah, Battlefield 2 and Battlefield 2142. So I'm dating myself there to 2005.
I was playing Pokemon,
those competitively.
Pokemon Emerald at the time, and then later Pearl and Platinum.
Gen 1, baby.
Yeah. Blue, yellow, red.
I still remember having a team of 6 Mewtwo. Given the fact that they're still finding stuff out on the original, first gen Pokemon stuff, things like the Mew glitch and being able to go back into the SS and that stuff pretty simple. Even Final Fantasy VII, dear God, they've now found out lots of different ways to break that game in the last couple of years. Speed runners know no bounds, essentially.
Yeah,
it's insane. I mean, they've got to a point now where you can essentially finish the game with Aerith or however you want to which version. Did you ever play Final Fantasy VII, or was it before your time?
No, I'm not big into Final Fantasy, so.
How dare you? It's I replay it every few years. Let's see, I did 7, 8, and 10 recently. I didn't redo 9. I still haven't completed 15 or 13 or 13 too. 6, I waited so long for 8 to come out. Was insane. I bought a PS2 just to play and Final Fantasy VIII with the money I'd saved. I didn't have enough money for a memory card. So the first time I turned it on, I played it for 7 hours to get to Blitzball, but I couldn't save my progress because I never had a card. I got that far into the game. And I remember waiting so long for that to come out. That was 2001. Because it came out a year earlier in Japan. Now, Final Fantasy 16 has just come out, and I had absolutely no idea that it was.
Yeah.
The games I play now are more idle and clicker, and things like Farm RPG, which is not Farmville. It's better. Honest.
Yeah.
Sorry. People talk about their Duolingo streak. I talk about my Farm RPG streak.
But yeah, it's so sort of circling back to storage. I just I really should build a NAS, but I don't, because if you guys don't know, CNC is a nonprofit, and Google gives you 100 terabytes shared for a nonprofit. So we've basically just been using Google Drive as a big data dump for the CNC videos.
To be honest, I do that as a professional, so that's what it's there for. But I don't have the 100 terabytes because I'm not a charity. I pay what is it, $20 per 5 terabytes per month. So, and it's per employee as well, or per email address. And I have 5 NASs up here. And here's a hard drive that says 18 gigabytes. 18 gigabytes? Sorry, 18 terabytes.
Much more spicy than 18 gigabytes.
And up here I've got 10, 12 terabytes, and up here I've got 10, 14 terabytes in DASs. Turns out, and what annoyed me here is Linus scooped me on this. Turns out your system has a USB device limit. And for the system I've got them plugged into, so up here I've got DASs, which are 10 SATA drives, right? Just one USB in, and it splits out to 10 SATA drives. That counts as 34 USB endpoints because of all the controllers inside. Turns out the mini PC I have it attached to
can only be all 32.
Has a limit. And it's about 70. So I can put 2 in, but the minute I start putting anything more in, like a keyboard, it drops something.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fun times. And yeah, like Threadripper I think can do 128, and up here I've got like an i5 6500U mini PC and it does 70. So Threadripper doesn't get you that many more.
No.
But that's between all the USB ports on the system as well. And if some of them are served by controller, that number goes down as well.
Goes down, yeah.
Yeah. But Patrick asked 34 USB devices for 10 hard drives. Look at the Realtek, the cheap Realtek expansion, the USB to SATA, the 1 to 4s and the whatever, the way it ends up. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess just sort of rounding off, supercomputing next 2 weeks from now.
Yes. Yeah. So before then, I'm going to an event called Reach in London, which is a computer architecture thing. I'm hoping
London actually has a tech scene. I'm shocked.
It's more academic. Hang on. What's the conference called? Reach Emerging Architectures in Computing Horizons Conference. There's going to be a few speakers there, including somebody from Grok. Let me just have a look. One of the Tim Jones, professor of computer architecture at Cambridge. There's going to be an ARM fellow talking about SIMD and matrix ISAs. Grok. Though Simon McIntosh Smith professor of high performance computing, University of Bristol. He's he's got his name on several books and runs the Isambard supercomputer, I think. Though one of the speakers is Sophie Wilson from Broadcom. And I was hoping to see if I can get time with her and do an interview because she's really interesting. She was involved in some of the early days of ARM, but has spent most of the time, at least since the 90s, working on high-speed data at Broadcom. One of the also Mike Davies from Intel's Neuromorphic Lab is going to be there. I interviewed him on the channel like years ago, and I haven't seen him since. And given everything that's going on with Intel, obviously it's a bit up and down. So yeah, I'm going to be there for a couple of days. So Sophie's doing the plenary on day 2, the future of microprocessors. If you search her name on YouTube, you actually get a number of really interesting talks, and I've actually used some of her slides before. And North Pole, that's filled up. IBM's doing a North Pole presentation.
Why?
That's their neuromorphic architecture. Because they recently did a big update on North Pole. They announced North Pole like 7 years ago.
Yeah, and then they did a Hot Chips presentation that they then said we're not taking any questions about it.
Yeah, and they've presented a few more since, so that'll be interesting. That's actually quite new. So there's that, and then there's also I'm going to Electronica, and then the week after is supercomputing in Atlanta. We already during this stream, I've already got a email from a company called LightSolver, who's doing optical compute, and I want to go ask them, are you doing it in the way that made other companies leave it?
Yeah. Speaking of, I got an email from New Reality, who I need to reach out to.
Yep. Speak to Moshe. He's quite fun to speak to, the CEO.
Yeah, I remember meeting him last time, and I'm like, so what you're making is DPU, right? Well, so it's a DPU, right? And I eventually got them to say, yeah, it's basically DPU.
It's not. It's a host processor, but with a ton of acceleration, like a DPU. So, yeah. It's to reduce pre-processing for AI data flow, which is kind of cool. It means you can replace the CPU in your system if you use one of their chips.
And then, have you heard of Positron AI? Because,
I may have got an email from them that I deleted. Is that software?
No, it's hardware.
Then no, I didn't get an email. No.
Which is what piqued my interest. Andy and I are going to be going there to interview.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, if any of you guys are going to be there, Will, I know you're going to be there, so come say hi.
If you want to speak to Rambus, I can make an introduction.
Why would I talk to Rambus?
Well, quite. And there's going to be a big CXL. We've got a number of presentations that we're going to go see planned.
Have you started planning?
Oh yeah. No, I've got mine. I've got optical fabrics. I've got MLIR in HPC. I've got quantum HPC. I've got low precision HPC.
So the ones that I sent it to you, but the what do I call it? What's it called? The PMBS 24, the 15th International Workshop on Performance Modeling, Benchmarking, and Simulation of High Performance Computer Systems. That sounded really interesting to me. Whether it is interesting or not, we'll have to see.
It's funny. Supercomputing is a HPC conference, right? And it's mostly academics. And it's funny because some of the academics publish papers that wouldn't even, that essentially look like hardware reviews, but wouldn't pass the sniff tests to be posted online at an answer. Like, you published a research paper for this? I think, was it last year or a couple of years ago? I had a go at somebody who was claiming CPU power and system power were essentially equal. I turned around and said, how many fans did the Intel system have? How many fans did the AMD system have? How many sticks of memory did you have in it? What was the speed of the memory? What storage did you have? Did you have any BMC? He was taking the system power and assuming that between systems it was equal. And I couldn't get into his skull that what he's measuring isn't purely the CPU by taking the power at the wall.
No, you're measuring power supply differences, motherboard loss differences, VRM differences, fan differences, RAM configuration differences, whole bunch of stuff. Yeah.
So that session is going to be interesting because I wonder how many people do that.
Yeah. Well, so I know the one that the two that piqued my interest. Well, three actually that really piqued my interest was LLM inference benchmarking of large language models on AI accelerators, because benching LLMs is a pain. So I want to see how they are trying to do it. Microarchitectural comparison and in-core modeling of state-of-the-art CPUs, Grace, Sapphire Rapids, and Genoa. And then performance analysis of runtime handling for zero copy for OpenMP programs on MI300A APUs. Those were the three that caught my attention.
Yeah. It's I mean, I've got the press briefing listed, I've got the keynote listed, I've got meetings. I actually managed to Sam Manova. I'm going to have a meeting with Sam Manova. So also Arista has an Ethernet technology, a new one that may or may not be their Infinity Fabric solution.
Interesting.
So I'm going to go see that and see what that's all about.
Wait, you said Infinity Fabric? Ooh, I thought you said Infinity Band for a second.
No, their Ultra Ethernet Consortium thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that would be interesting. I'm like, wait, UA Link already? That seems a bit quick, but yeah, no, Ultra Ethernet makes a ton more sense.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. So. It's it's gonna be fun. Supercomputing is always fun. I've never been to Atlanta, so we'll see how that goes. See whether it's a state, worth visiting again. Supercomputing like Atlanta, they like Denver. I've been to one in Austin.
St. Louis was the other one, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well, we'll find out where the next one is as well afterwards.
Yeah.
But with that, we have been going for 3 hours 33.
Yeah.
And if I cancel it in 15 seconds, we go 3, but we won't do that. But thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are. Don't stay too tuned to the news, but at least keep an eye out. And as we said at the top of the show, if you are in a position where you're able to vote, then please go and do your civic duty so you have a voice. Vote for your future. Vote for your family. Vote for the scenario that gives your family autonomy and choice for what they can do. And as we are, here all liking silicon and chips, vote for a strategy that makes sense. I've always said voting is like taking a bus to a destination. The bus never gets you to where you exactly want to go, but get the one that takes you close. Take the one that gets you the closest. And don't get the one that takes you in the opposite direction as a protest, because it just means you have to walk further to where you need to be.
Yeah.
And with that, have a good one. We should see you next week. It'll probably be late next week, given my schedule. Probably Friday. And realistically, that's going to be like a pre-supercomputing. Actually, no, Friday you'll be in Atlanta, won't you?
Yes, I will be in Atlanta. I fly in at 4 p.m.
Okay. Yeah, we should be able to do it then.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
But we'll see you on the next one.
Have a good one, you folks.